In the main character's past life, rumors were circulating everywhere that the ruler was looking for his missing daughter. This man, whom everyone called arrogant and rude, was also a liar. In fact, he was not looking for a daughter, but a replacement for her. A man who loves the beauty of greenery, head of the Duke Aubrey estate. It was he who met an unfortunate end, and as a replacement, he found our main character. It turns out that my daughter disappeared when she was not even a year old. The girl doesn't understand how he knows that her daughter's voice is like a thrush's singing. It seems she was a true genius as a child. The Duke said that she should behave like his daughter. But the girl didn't understand what this meant at all, and he said that he would ask a couple of questions, and she should write down the answers. He treats her like she's some kind of orphan with no voice. She didn't understand what it was. He simply handed her a blank piece of paper. Then the Duke said she'd better get tested, because if she can get through it, then she will live peacefully like his reign for the next 5 years. The girl was surprised when he said about 5 years, and the gentleman replied that she was naive and had forgotten that she could replace his precious daughter for the rest of her life. Not really, but memories from a past life suggested he only thought about himself. The girl said she just thought it was some kind of content. The gentleman said that she would have a couple of things to do, and after 5 years, he would send her to study abroad so that she would live in another country. So it turns out she'll just have to play a role. It would be better if she went to the interview with the merchants. The Duke suggested starting an investigation. The first question asked her what her hobbies were, and the girl replied that she loved reading. Now that told her she was quite educated, though you wouldn't say so. After which he asked how old she was. Our girl was 10, but his daughter was 11. The girl didn't understand why he was asking at all, since he was constantly interrupting her. This interrogation was something she had never had before. Now, he told her to write down the answers on a piece of paper, and she assumed that he was about to give her a math problem. When he actually started saying something strange, the girl was shocked and didn't understand when this idiot would come to his senses. He said that it was elementary, so she should decide on it quickly, and did not understand what she was staring at. The girl thought it was Mensa, but she didn't know what it was, having never heard of it before. Although she thinks that she can solve the problem, so she decided to give it a try, and then thought about how she ended up here in the first place. To find the answer to this question, it is enough to look at her terrible life. Simply put, the main character was the subject of crazy experiments. Because of what was happening, her childhood memories simply disappeared, and she thought he would always be her father, while she suffered until she was 24. The girl was merely a vessel containing the soul of this psycho's wife. Out of rage at the betrayal, the girl closed her eyes on the cold experimental table and thought she had died, but then she opened her eyes and thought she was in heaven, but she had returned in time. And then she ended up in a shelter when that man sold her. She couldn't believe her life would get even worse. Luckily, she regularly read the newspaper, so she knew everything that would happen over the next 10 years. Back then, she often saw that name on the pages, Duke Chagall Aubrey. He was the second most powerful man and controlled 50% of the empire's trade, becoming the head of the family, ahead of his older brothers. Perhaps he was destined to become a ruthless man in order to survive in the treacherous ducal family. Then the Duke asked why she was staring and not deciding, and the girl said that she had already decided. The man was surprised. He thought he had cheated, but everyone knew he was kind to his wife and a good follower of the Blue Moon ruler. She has been experiencing a strange feeling for a long time now. It seems she knows many places that she has never even seen before, and she also knows information about different people. This is possibly a side effect of the experiments. Then she heard his words of approval, and he remarked that he didn't even know how she managed to solve the problem in such a short time. The girl replied that she was simply a genius, and because of this, she even saw at least some joy in him. He noted that she barely managed it, and that he was also quite smart. Therefore, he decided that he would adopt this girl. On the internet, she was quite cute. The girl thought you were, of course, far from handsome. Well, actually, it's even strange that she managed it. She doesn't understand why there were no interviews for the role of the Duchess's daughter in her past life. This death was painful and agonizing for her, and she even dreamed of dying quickly. She died and came back to life 3 months ago, but she woke up under a tree. She noticed the woman trying to tell Lana that adoption was an interesting event, but the girl didn't want to leave. The main character did not understand where she was now and what was happening. They say that a person does not feel dying, but she experienced excruciating pain. She was sure that she was dead, but now she is alive. Looking around, she did not understand at all where she was. She could hardly see. She had strange, painful feelings, and the girl's name was familiar to her, but she'd never heard it before. The kind tone spoken to children adopted by nobles beyond the lost memories made the orphanage feel like hell. The skin began to peel off from her face, and because of the experiments, she felt pain even from a breath of wind. The smell of horrible drugs is more monstrous than the rotting of a corpse, but now she has returned. Just recently, she was experiencing pain, but everything is gone: long flowing hair, clear light skin, and cute fingers. She doesn't think she's dreaming now, and it seems she's finally free. In fact, she's been dreaming of freedom for a long time. So she started laughing. She couldn't believe that God was actually roasting over her. She was so happy and thought that this was really a chance to start all over again. Well, then she didn't understand what was going on. Something appeared on her hand, and she didn't understand what it was. She was simply horrified because she noticed traces of the experiment on her hands. She wanted to start all over again, so much she was willing to lose all her powers. The main reason why she died was that when the described ancient language takes over the whole body, it means that traces of incurable diseases lead to death. She thought she was finally back to normal life, but now she realizes she's finished. If she went back to the past, it means that this idiot is also alive, but doesn't know about her yet. But she absolutely needs revenge. Now she simply cannot die alone. Because of this, she will ruin his life. She needs to prove herself and get a letter of recommendation. The most famous orphanage in the empire has its own secret. Children who receive good grades can live under the protection of the nobility. The rest are poor students or simply don't like their teachers. These children then disappear under the pretext of finding a family. He must have done so for the same reason as the main character. She needs to get more good grades. She can't be stupid anymore. And then she'll definitely be able to get revenge. Everyone was completely shocked when the girl told the teacher the dishes were done and stayed behind to cook and unpack. She asked if there was anything else she could do to help, but the teacher said that Anissa could already walk. The woman was surprised that she had coped so quickly, and the girl said that she was grateful and would try to help the teachers in everything. The woman was shocked because this girl was working in the kitchen for the first time. It's amazing that she's doing so well. She always got bad grades, and she couldn't believe that she could change so much in a couple of months. In her past life, she reacted differently because the girl remembers this teacher, and the woman had already begun to think about regularly taking this girl to the kitchen. She was the one who gave most of the grades, and in this case, she decided to thank this woman with a smile on her face. This woman will also be included in the list, along with the main character. Even if she goes to a difficult lesson, it shouldn't be difficult because she's used to it. She cooked and cleaned. I lived to gain the acceptance of a mad scientist. Just the thought lifts me down. Therefore, she will definitely take revenge. But when she was in her own, of course, she accidentally hit someone. She asked forgiveness from the gentleman whom she accidentally hit. He didn't understand what it was and called her a slob. The girl got angry, and the man was shocked that she simply apologized. And that's all. And began to say that she was like, when she kills a person, she will say the same thing. It seems she really thinks that she can even talk to him on equal terms. But the girl said that she thought that maybe, and then he asked if she even knew who he was. The girl replied that indeed, and he had secured Countess Charlotte's support. The system of support is the same as in an orphanage, where the honor of a noble sponsor increases with the amount of payments. The guy asked again if she even knew his name. He wasn't such a fool as to mess around with her. Well, the girl told him to be careful, because the Count is a ruthless killer. He better leave, otherwise he might be next. He was completely freaked out. I asked him what he was even talking about. She looked like she wanted to die, and he said he was going to punch her in the mouth. The girl said that he could in principle try to do this. He became very angry, but when he tried to hit her, he heard someone calling him. The woman asked what Peter was doing now, and said she couldn't believe he was such a rude person. The girl knew it was a lie. They only paid attention because the case involved a child being supported. He tried to say that everything was wrong, and she understood that this was probably why they came running. And also she saw that there was a man with green hair there. They must not want to appear in front of this man because he is noble. She watched his every move carefully, noting the care with which he stepped. It was important to her that Peter make no mistake in front of such an important person. She couldn't allow him to slip up at this crucial moment. The situation was clearly not going their way. The teacher, realizing this, decided to approach Anissa. The girl responded quickly, assuring everyone she was fine, although in reality, she was a little tense. If she could secure their support, she would be able to put them in their place herself. The girl was confident she could prove her worth, but she needed to wait for the right moment. The teacher asked her to walk with her for a moment, which caught Anissa off guard. She didn't understand why and was clearly confused, trying to figure out what exactly she was talking about. When the teacher introduced her to the man, the girl felt fear wash over her. Her palms grew sweaty, and her heart began to beat faster, knowing this moment would decide everything. She couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. Of course, she knew this day would come, but she didn't expect it to happen so soon, and under such awkward circumstances, too. Now she was absolutely certain that the first impression was already hopelessly ruined. It seemed to her that everything had gone wrong, and there was no chance of fixing the situation. However, Anissa quickly regained her composure. She didn't let fear get the better of her, maintained her composure, and greeted him with due respect. The girl smiled, deciding that if he'd already seen how she was being treated, here all she could do was maintain her dignity. She knew it was best not to show her true emotions right now. His reaction was cold and reserved, which made her pause. Perhaps she shouldn't have expected anything more from him, and her attempts to win him over had been in vain. The man asked who had taught her such good manners, and the teacher was quick to answer. She explained that nobles often took such children on as pages or governesses, which helped them learn etiquette. It seemed her first impression of him had been wrong. Suddenly, he showed interest and asked how exactly the girl had guessed that he was a man of noble birth. He simply has a commanding tone, and his cloak is also made of very expensive fabric, but she cannot tell him this. So she said he simply had a graceful gait and a beautiful voice. He said she couldn't notice the graceful gait even when he was wearing a cloak, or the beauty of his voice before he spoke. She flattered him, hoping that he could be an adoptive father, but he turned out to be very disgusting. However, she liked his violet eyes. They are mysterious and beautiful. By the way, she said that he had a meeting with a potential adoptive father, and it seems she already knew in advance. The teacher said that it was impolite to keep the distinguished guest waiting, so they would already be leaving. When they entered the room, the teacher told them to sit down. They would bring tea now, and she also asked for congratulations to introduce their student to him. The girl sees her teacher Irina for the first time. She was so passionately picked up. It seems like she really is such an important person. The gentleman said he already knew her name and asked the teacher to leave. The woman asked again, as she needed to consult him about adoption. The man asked with disdain, "I also told her that he is going to adopt her. He will make this decision, so he asks to leave them." This was the first time the girl had seen someone discipline their arrogant teacher like that. She loved to divide her students into favorites and despised ones. She was the most vile of teachers, and she was terribly proud of her work. The teacher clearly singled her out among the other children, but not in a good way. She picked on her, humiliated her in front of the class, and made her feel insignificant. It simply seemed impossible to tolerate such treatment. Suddenly, the teacher approached and unexpectedly hugged her like a caring mentor. But her words were less kind. The girl was being sternly ordered not to embarrass herself in front of the important guest. However, this was said quietly, almost in a whisper. The teacher wanted the girl to understand that her unexpected kindness was merely a mask concealing a threat. It's easiest to vent anger on someone weaker, and the teacher took advantage of this. Her behavior had a simple explanation. The girl was an easy target for humiliation. The girl replied calmly that she would try, but inside anger was already welling up inside her. This woman had irritated her for a long time, and now it was even more so. The teacher added that if she needed anything, she'd be right outside the door, but the girl knew she shouldn't expect any help from her. Anissa decided the best tactic was to simply be a good girl. Perhaps that would keep her out of trouble, because sometimes obedience is the key to peace. But deep down, she knew they would see what she was capable of. She would smile, but that smile would only be the harbinger of her revenge. At that moment, a male voice rang out, irritated and commanding. This brought her back to reality. She should have acted nice as she had planned. The man took off his coat. He seemed unpleasant to her, but it wasn't her fault he was like that. She just had to play her part. He invited her to sit down, and the girl smiled sweetly, agreeing. Everything had to look natural, so as not to arouse suspicion. But then she noticed his appearance. Long green hair, rare violet eyes. Such a combination was rare. Besides, he was truly handsome. But something in his gaze was unsettling. Why was he looking at her like that? There was something in that gaze she couldn't understand. The man chuckled and suggested that she probably thought he was a disgusting villain. He watched her reaction. Now she was caught. He could end her suffering, or on the contrary, turn it into something even more painful. He was witty, sarcastic, and had a nasty temper. That's how Anissa first met the damn Duke Chagall Aubrey. She feels bad that he will really just take her away from here. She understands how to process the documents and how to go through a month of special training for adoption. When they were sitting in the carriage, the man thought she was disappointed. But the girl replied that this was not so. He did not even give her time to think about it. He could have given her time to get used to the idea that she would be adopted. Obviously, a quick end awaits him. If not, then his family will die out anyway. It's like they're playing with a time bomb to see who will die first. But now she decided to think about who should die. She remembered that after his wife died of illness, he looked for something to drown his grief in and took part in the royal hunt. He missed, and many of the cast hit a member of the imperial family, and any people's just ruler, Alf Agro, was killed by Duke Aubrey. After this, the magic of the Aubrey family was banned in the empire, and the family was executed always alone. But then the main character of color and the heiress of the Aubrey family appears with the same magical ability. Well, here she started thinking, what kind of main character could there be? After all, this is not some kind of Roman, but perhaps this is the result of an experiment. After what was done at the bottom, some strange things are constantly happening. Now some kind of voiceover has appeared, or maybe she has developed some kind of gift of foresight. Ironically, she experienced death and rebirth again. However, the effects of the experiment still linger, as if they had left an invisible mark on her. Because of this, she didn't have much time left. The Duke looked at her, carefully assessing the situation and her current state. He noticed that her name was Anissa and said it out loud. The girl nodded, confirming that it was indeed so. He then suggested that she learn their family's rules before they arrived. She, of course, didn't refuse the opportunity. The first and foremost rule was that her name was no longer Anissa. Now she will be called Annette Aubrey. This name will become a new reality for her. The man left her no choice, and now she must come to terms with it. When they finally arrived, the man showed her the house where she would be spending the next 5 years. The building looked impressive, but that didn't make it any more comfortable. Aubrey's estate lay before her, luxurious, surrounded by greenery, and completely out of keeping with her life up to that point. The girl's attention was drawn to a stranger with pink hair. She didn't know who it was, but she clearly understood that she played some important role. The stranger looked excited almost to the point of tears, and suddenly exclaimed that she was her baby. This unexpected outburst only increased her confusion. Apparently, it was Roseanne, the woman she was, to name her future stepmother. The thought seemed strange, but there was no point in resisting. She was destined to be the first victim when trouble came for the Aubrey family. It seemed inevitable, though she didn't know exactly when it would happen. The man was clearly nervous, afraid she might give herself away. His gaze was intense, his movements too abrupt. Perhaps he truly thought she could forget everything he'd been telling her all along, but she remembered, and she knew she couldn't afford to make mistakes. Tell him, he said, that she should forget her previous one. You have to call him differently. From the moment they arrive at the estate, she will call him Dad. Surely she will immediately meet his wife, so she must call her mother, and she must also swear that somewhere now and forever, she will play the role of his daughter. This is a very unusual request. She also asked where his real daughter was, to which he replied that he managed to find her, but she was dead, and he would never dare tell his wife about it. But now, he told her not to ask any more questions about it. They had their own oracle. If she needed help, she could turn to her. She knows that Anissa is his daughter, and he also told her not to forget that from now on, she will be the sole heir to the family. Basically, yes, if she behaves like this, she's headed straight back to being an orphan. He also told her that her daughter was smart, naive, and kind. He'd been like that as a child too, and she took after him. Now the dilemma is how a girl who lived for so many years in a Syrian orphanage should react, how to convince her parents to come home again. The woman greeted the girl with trembling lips and tear-stained eyes. Her hands shook slightly, but despite her nervousness, she took a step forward. However, the little girl immediately hid behind the Duke's back, as if fearing what awaited her. Looking at the crying woman, the girl felt tears well up in her own eyes. She sobbed, and hesitating to take a step forward, quietly asked, "Is this really her mother?" There was uncertainty in her voice, as there was so much she didn't understand. The Duke began to feel nervous. He had expected anything, but he certainly hadn't expected the little girl to notice such details. His gaze darted from the girl to the woman, and he realized this was the child's moment of truth. The girl who had endured so many trials couldn't simply rejoice at the reunion. She feared further disappointment, feared being unwanted again. Deep down hope glimmered, but fear prevented her from taking the first step. She could be confused and intimidated by the unfamiliar luxury around her. Surrounded by unfamiliar faces and majestic halls, she sought support from someone she already knew. The Duke was the only person she knew, and this gave her confidence. However, she didn't want to play someone else's role. Lying to herself and others was unpleasant. She didn't like pretending, even if it might make the situation easier. The woman tried to approach her voice, trembling with emotion. With pleading eyes, she declared that she was indeed her mother, and called the girl by her name, Annette. She told him how long she'd searched for it, how she'd hoped this day would come. Her voice broke as she begged him to let her hug her daughter just once. Her pain was genuine, and there wasn't a hint of falsehood in it. The girl couldn't hold back any longer. Tears streamed down her face, and she threw herself into her mother's arms. The woman gasped with joy, holding the little girl tightly to her. She couldn't believe this moment had finally arrived. The woman hugged the girl tightly, tenderly, as if afraid of losing her again. The warmth of her mother's arms enveloped the little girl, but something inside troubled her. Perhaps because she has no right to someone else's mother's biotech. Perhaps she can't separate herself from the memories of pain and tears. Whatever the case, she must never allow this to happen again. The Duke turned to Rosanna and said that she was probably embarrassed by them for now. Then the main character realized that she really had not squeezed out a tear in vain. The gentleman said that while his wife went to her room, he would show her to her room since his wife was still recovering. The main character couldn't even imagine that he could speak in such a gentle voice. The mother looked at the girl with a gentle smile, and noticing her fatigue, told her to go to her room to rest a bit. She expressed hope that her daughter would finally come out and join them for dinner. The little girl nodded confidently, promising that she would definitely come when the time was right. Then one of the maids approached her, gently supported her by the shoulder, and helped her leisurely walk toward her chambers. The Duke looked at Annette carefully, his voice stern, but not harsh. He wanted to understand her state, and asked point-blank if it was true that she was crying. However, the girl, unfazed, immediately declared it wasn't true. With a slight smile, she added that she was simply putting on an act. She then noted that his daughter, in her opinion, is smart but naive and kind, and now taking care of her is her new responsibility. The Duke frowned in surprise, thinking it sounded like some kind of report, but soon he gave the order to let everyone know his daughter had finally returned home. He demanded that the servants watch her closely, surround her with care, and protect her as if she were the most precious jewel. The servants, hearing these words, were sincerely happy because they were pleased to see their mistress again after such a long absence. The Duke looked at the girl and couldn't understand why she was so surprised. If she was here, that meant this was her home. While she shouldn't have her hopes up, the situation itself is an incredible stroke of luck that not everyone gets to experience. True, this period will last only 5 years, so hoping for anything more would be reckless. The maids greeted Lady warmly, welcoming her with joy. They introduced themselves as Mary and Gold, genuinely delighted to have her in their home. The girl hadn't expected to meet them so quickly. She decided that she would still try to stay away from the Duke so as not to interfere in his affairs. It was important to her to follow instructions no matter what happened. The main thing was to avoid creating unnecessary problems and drawing unnecessary attention to herself. The maids suggested addressing them informally, which greatly embarrassed the girl. She didn't know how to react to such intimacy. Overall, it was the beginning of something new for her. However, the point of being dressed was completely unclear to her, and she began to protest. The maids were shocked by her decision. The girl declared that she could dress herself, which left them perplexed and deeply confused. The Duke was not yet aware of what was happening, and the maids tried to gently explain that they needed to help the mistress with her bath. But the girl was adamant she wasn't going to agree, and didn't know what to do, because if she took off her clothes, she would certainly be caught. The girl nevertheless admitted that she felt very awkward and looked at them with pity, as if apologizing for her discomfort. Her eyes expressed embarrassment. They offered to at least bring her some water, promising to wait in the room without going far. They were willing to help so she wouldn't feel alone. The lady tried to say that she would prefer to dress herself without anyone's help. She didn't want to be disturbed at such a private moment. She explained that she could not share the secret with the Duke, because if he found out, she would be immediately excommunicated, and she would lose the chance to be near him. She felt that there was no point in dwelling on such a pathetic defect that could put her life at risk at any moment if it was not corrected. Now she had a chance to get rid of the problem, but to do so, she needed to find another solution. This excuse wouldn't work once she started living with him. The chameleon slime was a unique invention created by some scientist who strived for genius in his developments. If you stick it to your skin, it will change color to match your skin tone, so the marks will be invisible, and no one will notice the damage. Many people bought this slime to cover up burns and scars, making them invisible. The girl thought it would help her hide the marks. But the problem was, this thing hadn't been invented yet, and it didn't exist yet, even though she needed it right now. She couldn't wait several years, as the situation required an urgent solution. She dreamed of getting slime within at least 6 months. She needed to find this scientist and persuade him to speed up. Luckily, she knew him well and could use her connections. This scientist was eccentric, almost mad, but recognized as a genius of his time. He was known for his unusual views and discoveries. Thanks to his narcissism, she was able to learn what he liked and what disgusted him. This knowledge gave her an advantage in communicating with him. She suspected he might be prepared for her trick. At that moment, the maids arrived to see if she had finished and whether she had found it difficult to wash alone. The girl replied that she would prefer to walk around the estate, as she was tired and wanted to rest in her room and enjoy some privacy. However, she decided she wanted to get used to the estate as quickly as possible, so she went for a walk. By the time she looked around, it was already evening. The maids informed her that everything would soon be ready and advised her to hurry so that she could have time to prepare for dinner. The estate was so large that even in a whole day, it was impossible to see all its corners and enjoy every detail of it. Mother addressed Annette in a soft tone, and the girl responded with a slight smile, not hiding her friendliness and warmth. The mother looked at the girl with interest and asked how she liked the food. She smiled happily and enthusiastically declared that it was incredibly delicious, better than she could have expected. In her past life, she had to eat only through IVs, and in the orphanage, food was always simple and served to everyone at once without individual portions. Hearing that the girl liked it, the mother noticeably perked up and offered to try the dessert, assuring her that it was very sweet and she would definitely like it. As soon as the girl tried the dessert, she was completely delighted. It was so delicious that she couldn't contain her joy, even though she knew she wouldn't be able to eat every last crumb. She suddenly thought, if she could have eaten like this her whole life, her fate would have turned out differently. At that moment, her mother, slightly embarrassed but sincere, asked the girl to call her Mom. She knew that the girl was smart beyond her years, and now she wanted to at least slightly compensate for the lost time to become a real mother to her. It would be wonderful if the girl could call her Mom, at least sometimes. These words touched the child deeply, and overcoming a slight nervousness, she uttered the cherished word. The girl looked at her seriously and said she would try to get used to calling her Mom. She sincerely thanked them for all the efforts and searching that had led her to this house. The Duke was stunned. He even felt his heart skip a beat. It was so unexpected that he almost lost the power of speech. There was surprise in his eyes, but the girl didn't understand what had caused such a reaction. She simply did what she thought was right. He kept his gaze fixed on his wife, clearly pondering something important. The girl couldn't figure out what exactly he was thinking about, but she sensed tension in the air. And then a loud scream rang out. The girl turned around and saw something she probably shouldn't have seen. The Duke shouted Rosanna's name, urging her to come to her senses, and then sharply gave the order to take her to her room before things got worse. But it turned out to be much more serious than the girl initially thought. It was surprising that she hadn't already passed out from shock. She saw the despair in the Duke's eyes and knew she had to do something. Simply standing by and watching was impossible. The girl did not know how to properly treat this disease, but she quickly realized that hot water and sugar could help and asked Mary to prepare them. She also remembered that there was a way to ease the condition a little. She ordered the rye grains to be roasted dried and then ground into flour. Rye. It's a simple yet crucial ingredient in the treatment of many ailments. While it wasn't a panacea, the girl knew it could play a vital role in saving a life. To heal you, only need to use a tiny amount. Then the calming effect will be immediate. The maid said she'd prepare it right now. Now was the perfect time to stage the flood, and the protagonist decided to carry out this plan without hesitation. She knew for certain that her actions would lead to the desired result. The Duke looked closely at Rosanna and asked if she was truly feeling better. She nodded calmly, confirming that she felt noticeably better than before. However, she couldn't shake the thought that Annette would probably be very frightened. Moreover, she was certain she wouldn't be a good mother to the girl, and this worried her. The Duke was visibly alarmed by her words. He couldn't allow her to think that way about herself and firmly ordered her never to say such a thing again. But as soon as he turned away, he heard the girl call for her mother. There was an urgency in her voice that made him stop. Annette proudly announced that she had brought the medicine for her mother. She was confident it would help her recover quickly. The Duke looked at the child in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about. Then he calmly explained that her mother was currently ill, and therefore it would be best for the girl to leave. However, Annette had no intention of leaving. She confidently walked up to her mother, ignoring the Duke's words, and insistently offered her the medicine. The Duke was confused. He frowned and asked sharply what she was doing, why she was acting so self-assured and not asking permission. He couldn't understand where she got so much courage, and at that moment, he realized that the girl was completely unaware of her place. Her behavior was too brazen. But then he noticed she was smiling, and this confused him even more. What did that smile mean? Why wasn't she afraid of his anger? Annette calmly replied that everything was fine, since she inherited her intelligence from her father. She said this with such ease that the Duke couldn't help but pause. The mother was touched by her daughter's concern. It was the first time she'd seen her show such genuine concern, and she couldn't deny it. She looked at the Duke and gently said, "There was no point in getting so angry. Everything was fine, and there was no need to make such a big deal about it." She then took the medicine, noting that it was sweeter than she expected, although there was a slight bitterness to the taste. Annetta said with a smile that she hoped her mother would recover quickly, but for now it would be best for her to rest. The girl turned and headed for the exit. The Duke stood there lost in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had some kind of plan. Perhaps she was up to something? As she walked out the door, Annette sighed with relief. The Duke's words still echoed in her head, but she knew she had done the right thing. She knew she was safe now. At least they wouldn't experiment on her. She'd done everything she could, and that was the main thing. Her goal was to help, and she knew everything would be okay. She wasn't in a lab. She didn't have to be afraid anymore. Everything would work out as it should. But suddenly, a maid called out to her. This unexpected voice caught her off guard, and she shuddered in fear. She quickly realized that in front of them, it was better for her to look innocent and harmless, like a child, so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion and avoid unnecessary problems. So she smiled broadly, feigning surprise. She added that it was the first time she'd ever heard adults scold her, but that it would remain their little secret. She knew she shouldn't show even a hint of fear. At that moment, Rosanna turned to her husband and asked why he was so angry with his daughter, given how difficult it had been to find her. The Duke replied that he wasn't worried about her disappearance itself, but rather that his wife was feeding the girl something strange. However, Rosanna countered, reminding him that she was simply caring for her. He admitted that this was indeed commendable. He just wasn't used to such displays of concern. But despite that, he shouldn't act so coldly. She sensed his demeanor soften slightly and was relieved to know he'd heard her. The Duke, though a little irritated, nevertheless acknowledged that he understood. Then he suddenly noticed that the cough that had been tormenting the girl seemed to have completely stopped, which caused him genuine surprise. Rosanna paused and admitted she hadn't noticed it herself. Moreover, she noticed that the unpleasant chill in her body had also disappeared. They were both stunned. The girl had never recovered from her illness so quickly before, which was astonishing. The lady couldn't understand how it had happened. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, but whatever it was, it really did work. He suddenly remembered the confidence on the girl's face. It was evident in her gaze, and the way she spoke, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. But he couldn't bring himself to claim that everything was truly so simple, because so much remained unclear. So he turned to Pedro for advice, hoping for his opinion. He asked her to bring Mary and Golda and informed her that he would need to hear their opinions. This was crucial for understanding the next steps. He needed to find out if she noticed anything strange or unusual that could explain the girl's behavior. He said they couldn't just rest until they got answers. He also reminded her that she should apologize to her daughter for everything that happened, and this would be important for restoring the relationship between them. He understood that this method was unsuitable for either him or the child. Any attempt to solve the problem with this approach could lead to even greater misunderstandings. But perhaps this girl truly does have the power to help Roseanne. Perhaps she could heal her, and that could be the turning point. Roseanne was perfectly healthy until one event occurred that changed her life dramatically. If that hadn't happened, everything might have been different. About 10 years ago, rebellions broke out across the empire, leading to chaos. Factions opposed to the nobility began to struggle for power and influence within the state. The reason was the emperor's thoughtless policies. His reign was devastating, as the previous emperor was known as one of the worst despots in history. Wasteful and corrupt, he not only governed poorly, but also constantly sought wars, which further worsened the situation in the empire. Commoners were mobilized into the army to make up for the shortage of soldiers. When finances became scarce, the emperor raised taxes, further exacerbating the crisis. The nobles couldn't resist the emperor and were forced to follow his orders, even if it conflicted with their interests. Everything was done according to his laws, and they couldn't change anything. Eventually, the people could no longer bear the oppression, and uprisings began. The eastern regions became the center of the struggle for freedom and justice. Wars continued, taxes grew ever higher, and the nobles tried with all their might to subjugate the people. But the people no longer held anything of value, and they were prepared to fight to the bitter end. Some nobles resorted to public beheadings of peasants to pacify them, but rebellions broke out across the country, and the peasants' thirst for revenge could no longer be stopped. This resulted in a wave of kidnappings of noble children, and the peasants justified this by saying that since their children were being killed, they would also take the children of the aristocracy. The number of abducted children continued to grow, and soon this terrible fate befell Aubrey's family. This prediction came true, touching their lives. The Aubrey family had a nanny who served them faithfully for many years, without experiencing any trouble. But one day, her son suddenly disappeared, on the day the squire visited the estate. The duke was shocked. He couldn't imagine that this woman, who had served him faithfully, could be involved in a kidnapping. The next terrible event was the murder of a marquis's son. The marquis, consumed by rage, incited the nobles to revolt, and the emperor, only 16 years old, was assassinated. The entire empire was on the brink of collapse. The anger of the people, coupled with the fury of the nobles, formed a powerful alliance that overthrew the accursed regime. This was the beginning of a new era for the country. After the tragic death of the emperor, children began to return to their noble parents, hoping for the restoration of justice and peace. However, among those who did not return was his daughter. He could not forget how long he had hoped for her return, but sadly, she was no longer there. The Argo family's son also never returned, but fortunately, young Argo was found and brought home. This was a huge relief for the entire family. When Rosanna learned that young Argo had been found alive, her heart filled with joy. She felt long-awaited relief and hope like never before. This opened up new possibilities for hope for her. She thought that perhaps their daughter was also somewhere nearby, still alive. But despite all his hopes, he found it difficult to tell his wife the truth because he was told that only the charred body of their daughter had been found. He learned that she had been burned and that the only way to identify her was by the necklace they had once given their daughter. It was unbearable. He didn't know how to tell this to his wife, how to break such terrible news, because he didn't want her heart to break with pain. He couldn't imagine how she would survive such grief, especially after the first sign of joy had appeared on her face. He decided to keep it a secret, so she wouldn't have to go through the same thing he had. It might have been too painful for her. Instead of telling her the truth, he brought home a girl with green hair. She looked like their daughter, but it couldn't be her. The girl was the same age as their daughter, but it wasn't hers. He felt like it wasn't what he was looking for. If he could truly find his daughter and bring her back, everything would be completely different. He dreamed of it, but he didn't know how. Perhaps her eyes would have been as golden as this girl's, but he knew that was not the case. This girl was not their daughter. He saw that this girl resembled him, but he knew she couldn't be their daughter. He was sure their child would be completely different. Annette had light violet eyes like his. He knew those eyes couldn't just disappear, and that they wouldn't change. This only happens when a person becomes the subject of experiments, but he could not believe it. The gentleman asked incredulously if the tea was really made from rye grains and sugar. He found it odd that such a simple drink was being served in his house, and he wanted to make sure he hadn't misheard. He still couldn't believe that before him was truly only water, infused with rye grains and sugar. It seemed too modest a treat, but the maids had already confirmed it, and he had no reason to doubt it. Trying to understand the meaning of what was happening, he decided that perhaps it was some kind of folk remedy. The maids, exchanging a quick glance, announced that the little mistress had already returned to her chambers and was currently resting. However, they added with a slight nervousness that they didn't want to appear rude, but the girl looked frightened, as if something unusual had happened. One of the maids cautiously added that the young mistress had confessed that her father had never raised his voice to her before. It was so unexpected that she seemed confused. The Duke was irritated, not even understanding what kind of day he was having today. Something had clearly thrown him off balance, and the gloomy expression on his face only confirmed his inner discontent. Suddenly, as if needing a break from his thoughts, he ordered the servants to tell him what children usually liked. There was no usual sternness in his voice, more like a weary thoughtfulness. Meanwhile, the girl was about to write a letter to that disgusting scientist, but Chagall unexpectedly interrupted her plans by literally showering her with a mountain of all sorts of cakes. Completely perplexed, she looked at her father and asked why she needed so many sweets. The Duke merely shrugged indifferently, remarking that he'd simply decided to buy them for no particular reason. The girl couldn't get over her surprise. Where did he even get those cakes in the middle of the night? However, instead of answering, her father suddenly asked how she was feeling, peering intently into her face. Having pulled herself together, the girl said with a smile that she was fine. She was more concerned about whether her father was truly angry with her, as this had never happened before. It all sounded like Sundra behavior, though there was no point in dwelling on it for long. Her maids were due soon, and the conversation would surely end on its own. Suddenly, the girl looked at her father more seriously, realizing that perhaps she should act not just like a daughter, but show herself to be more mature. She smiled and said she was incredibly grateful to him, and that she loved cakes. She added that he was the best dad in the world. The Duke froze for a moment, but the girl, unnoticed cheerfully, declared that she would definitely eat every last piece. He shouldn't worry, after all he was the best father. Her happiness was genuine, and she sincerely expressed how lucky she was to have such a wonderful dad. He's not only the smartest, but also the best person she knows. A few more seconds, and the stream of admiration continued. She spoke enthusiastically about how her father always takes care of her, that he is the head of the family, and the best in the whole wide world. At some point, she decided enough was enough. She never would have thought it would be so simple. She had so much energy after the cakes that sleep seemed to vanish completely. As a result, she spent the entire night awake, full of energy and emotion. Her powers are clearly insufficient right now to establish contact with this mad scientist. Apparently, her abilities are simply insufficient, and no amount of trickery will help her contact him. It looks like she'll have to turn to the Duke. She's been in his domain for a long time, but she still can't manage her life the way she used to. She doesn't have any money either, and without it, dealing with this scientist will be impossible. So first, she needs to get her hands on his research by any means necessary. His research mentions a completely new method of working with magical stones. Typically, such a stone has only one property. For example, if infused with fiery energy, it becomes a firestone. However, with certain manipulations, it is possible to achieve that the same stone absorbs two different properties at once, which was considered impossible. For example, if a firestone were combined with a water stone, the result would be a new mineral capable of creating scalding water. This discovery could be enormously beneficial. To achieve her goal, she needs to win the Duke's trust. If he sees her as a valuable ally, she could pitch him her business idea. Moreover, she's treated well here, and she'd reciprocate. She always considered herself a genius. However, as she was walking down the hallway, someone unexpectedly tripped her. She didn't have time to react and fell to the floor with a loud crash. It turned out that the maids who had been standing nearby and watching her fall were responsible. She couldn't understand what was going on. The girls approached her, but instead of apologizing, they merely remarked that she had accidentally tripped and should be more careful where she stepped in the future. Moreover, they brazenly stated that she should learn to behave properly if she wanted to be respected. They discussed her situation with irony, certain she wouldn't be able to handle even this simple task. She was lucky after all. Not every orphan is so fortunate. They too wouldn't have minded being in her place and becoming adopted children of nobles. It seems this house is losing all value to her offers. From other families are already coming in, and now she has only to choose among the more influential owners. The thought of serving a filthy commoner disgusts her. Wherever she goes, she encounters these vile bullies. They're just waiting for her to lose her temper. The worst part is, they're grown women yet they act like children. Their behavior irritates her. The girl calmly stated that she wasn't in pain. They feigned apologies in response, but she merely chuckled and suggested they tell her directly whether she really did smell bad. The maid hastened to assure her that there was no unpleasant odor. Then the girl warned that she would definitely tell her father everything. The women were taken aback by such impudence. She immediately pointed it out. After all, they themselves had just said they had already received offers from other families. So she'll simply convey to her father their desire to leave. Let him know they don't want to serve a homeless orphan and are looking for new masters. Afterwards, she asked if they were truly dissatisfied with their jobs. The women exchanged glances and noted that her father would likely be angry with her for saying so. They were sure she was the only one to blame. Since she wasn't looking where she was going, she had nothing to complain about, and this blackmail didn't surprise them. They'd heard worse from the mad scientist. The girl turned to them and stated with cold confidence that they seemed to actually believe they could intimidate her. Who's supposed to love her anyway? Is that the job of a butler or a headmaid? Perhaps it's the duty of a common servant. Of course, all of this sounds ridiculous and far from the truth. The only people who should truly feel warm feelings for her are the Duke and Duchess of Aubrey. Upon hearing their words, the lady asked if they seriously thought they could deceive her so easily. After all, her father personally brought her here, and now these people dare doubt him? It seems they're not just doubting the girl, but questioning the Duke's own words. However, she's not stupid and understands perfectly well what's going on, so she stated outright that she would definitely tell her father everything, and he's not so easily fooled, much less deceived. They'd better stop their weird antics, because her mother loves her, and her father would never hate his own daughter. In response, the girls only sarcastically asked who even said she was really his daughter. But the girl didn't back down. She asked again, were they really going to doubt the Duke himself? And then calmly added that she would inform him of everything. After all, her parents are very worried about her. They'll do everything to protect her, and then it'll be a matter of seeing who ends up worse off. When she turned around, the maids exchanged glances and realized they'd gone too far. They tried to smooth things over and quickly apologized. But it was clear to the girl, they seemed to think she would easily change her mind. If they were going to apologize, they should at least try to do so sincerely. So she just smiled and asked curiously why they suddenly had such happy faces. That smile irritated them to the core. I wanted to tell them exactly what they were thinking, or even spit in anger. The girl just shrugged. Was it really that hard to apologize? Or would she have to teach them how to do it herself? She was already tired of looking at them. The women were still seething with anger, but in the end, they reluctantly apologized. Then the girl, as if nothing had happened, smiled again, accepted their apologies, and in a completely calm tone, announced that she would now go and tell her father everything. The maids turned pale with horror, but the girl merely calmly reminded them that she hadn't forgiven them at all. She was merely teaching them how to apologize properly. Overall, the work these guys did was quite commendable. She's even willing to admit they tried hard, and might even offer some praise. Maybe she will even forgive them, but only on one condition. Every time they see her, they must drop to one knee as a sign of respect. Of course, she said it as a joke. If you took her words seriously, you'd think she was a haughty bore, but it's easier for her to just give them a little scare and move on. At least now she has the confidence that they won't bother her, at least not anytime soon. Meanwhile, the chef, noticing the girl, asked with curiosity what brought her to the kitchen. In response, she asked with a degree of surprise whether they had really recognized her here, since she hadn't even had time to introduce herself. The guy standing next to her chuckled and explained that, of course, he knew who she was. After all, he wasn't just a cook, but the estate's assistant chef. The girl thought Duke Aubrey must have warned him about her in advance, or perhaps he'd figured it out himself, since according to the novel, the Duke respects hard-working people. And then her thoughts shifted to something else. What novel? Where were these strange words and fragments of phrases coming from in her head? But now was clearly not the time to deal with that. Instead, she decided to ask, could she use the kitchen for a while? However, the guy immediately made it clear it wasn't that simple. Then the girl, smiling slightly slyly, proposed a deal. She would tell them the secret of preparing high-quality meat from cheap ingredients. This method was brought back by a delegation of barbarians who participated in a conference about 3 years ago. To this day, no one in the Empire knows about it. If she manages to surprise the Duke with food, it will be easier to get the initial funds. For some reason, she feels that she needs to impress him. Everything around her fell silent, as if nature had frozen before an approaching storm. The girl felt tense because her father had given her the opportunity to prove something important. Realizing she had done wrong, the girl apologized with sincere regret. Then, gathering her courage, she added that she wanted to bring him something. At this time, the servant, with his usual politeness, asked the gentleman if he would like to take a short break and have a bite to eat. The gentleman just grinned and remarked that Pedro always appeared just when he was about to rest. Hearing this, the girl looked resolutely at her father and said that she had prepared the food especially for him, hoping that he would agree to try it. These words made the Duke think he realized that her appearance that time was no accident. She hadn't come just like that, but with a specific purpose. As Aubrey walked down the hallway, he noticed the scene unfolding before his eyes. He couldn't believe the maids were behaving so brazenly, so beyond what was permitted. If the girl had simply been bullied, he would have intervened, of course, but she used his name to intimidate the bullies, and that gave him pause. After all, she had come specifically with a complaint. She had only to say the word, and not a trace would have remained of those who had dared to antagonize her. He was sure that her offer of food was nothing more than an attempt to bribe him, a kind of bribe that he had never expected. However, when he caught a whiff of the aroma coming from the dish, he was truly amazed by what he smelled. The Duke was stunned when he saw Tsvetaeva's dish before him. It was stewed beef, and he was surprised not by the dish itself, but by the fact that it looked unusual and appetizing. For some reason, the chef decided to deviate from the usual standard recipes and prepared something special. This immediately caught his attention and piqued his interest. He suddenly realized he must have accidentally skipped a meal. The aroma of the dish was so appetizing that it awakened his hunger, making him eagerly pick up a fork. When he took his first bite, he was truly shocked. He expected something ordinary, but instead discovered that the dish lacked the unpleasant aftertaste he disliked in beef. The Duke couldn't believe meat could be so soft and tender. He wondered how long the chef had mastered this recipe and why he'd never tried it before. The dish seemed to have been prepared with particular care, and he guessed it wasn't just a culinary experiment. Someone must have specifically asked for it to be prepared this way. While pondering this, the Duke noticed another dish on the table. It was a berry pie, which he immediately recognized as his favorite combination: blueberries, strawberries, and bilberries. This surprised him even more, since he knew that only Rosanna knew about his dessert preferences. Even the chef hadn't been aware of his love of berries. He suggested that perhaps Roseanne had passed this information on to the child, but he also knew that she wouldn't worry about such details for him. In the end, the Duke decided it was simply a strange coincidence. Although he had his doubts, he saw nothing intentional in it. Besides, if his daughter had really been dating Roseanne, he would have been informed about it long ago. He couldn't just ignore it. Since things had turned out this way, he made a decision. If the child had brought him a treat, then so be it. He asked Pedro to serve tea to finish the meal. "Everything is for the best. I would like to ask about the tea that the child gave his wife yesterday, but first I need to find out why she came." However, this was already obvious. The Duke couldn't help but notice that his daughter possessed the same decency as he did. It was a pleasant realization. He was almost certain the girl had come to him for a reason. She likely had some request, and she was about to voice it. The girl was surprised that her intentions were so easily discerned. She hadn't expected the Duke to guess right away, and a little embarrassed. She admitted she'd like to ask something. Of course, the conversation will be about firing the maid. Well, perhaps there's nothing wrong with that. If the girl insists, it means she has good reasons. It would be sad if something like that happened again. She noted that she had uncovered a great secret while studying, and she asked if they could commercialize it. The Duke did not listen to her and said that they would fire her, and then asked again, and asked what the resignation meant. The girl didn't understand what they were talking about, and he asked again if she really meant business. He was shocked and noted that he was simply thinking about people who should be fired. But she'd better forget about it, and he hates wasting time on useless things like business, but asks her to tell him more. He was surprised because he thought she was going to call the maids. The girl would have noted that her father had probably heard about the magic stones. The gentleman, surprised, asked what she meant by magical stones. In response, the girl explained that these stones contained two opposing magics that existed simultaneously, making them especially valuable and rare. The Duke frowned, digesting what he'd just heard, and asked if she was serious. He found it hard to believe such a statement, as it went against the grain of accepted notions about magic. However, the girl merely shrugged, declaring that even a 3-year-old knew about the existence of magical stones with a single attribute. The idea of dual magic seemed strange to him, but her certainty gave him pause. She added that if the proportions are calculated correctly, when creating such stones, they can be sold profitably, then the idea no longer seems foolish, as their rarity makes them desirable. These words intrigued the Duke, and he said he would like to know more about it. If the girl was serious, such knowledge could prove quite useful. Hearing his interest, the girl decided to elaborate. She explained that her words weren't just guesses, but the result of observations and calculations. These weren't idle fantasies. At first, the Duke thought the girl was simply stubborn and determined to get her way, but as he listened to her explanations, he realized they were surprisingly logical and maturely reasoned for someone her age. Everything began to fit together. Then, the girl said she could try to implement her plan, but she needed to proceed with caution. Hasty actions could lead to undesirable consequences. The Duke concluded that she had prepared for this conversation in advance. He noted her confidence and logic, which made him pay closer attention to her words. After that, the girl changed the subject and asked him if he liked the food. The Duke, without thinking twice, replied that it was certainly not a culinary masterpiece, but quite edible. However, he was pleasantly surprised by the taste. He also noticed that the girl seemed to want to say something else, but hesitated. Her gaze betrayed a thoughtfulness, as if she was choosing the right words. The Duke praised her sincerity, hoping to encourage conversation. Then the girl, mustering up her courage, admitted she had one more request, but was finding it difficult to voice. The Duke looked at her carefully and guessed that the conversation would be about the maids. He was almost certain the girl was about to ask for something related to them. Still, there is a childish side to her too, and he can't believe that she is going to fire them. He will never let them into the estate again, and this applies to everyone who gets in the way. She mentioned that she wanted to ask if she could count on 20% of the income after she started trading, and then the gentleman said that he would fire them immediately. He didn't listen to her again and thought about the maids, but then he realized that he had screwed up again. The girl also told him that if this was too much, then 10% would also be fine. She was shocked that she wanted to fire them so badly and asked again if this was the topic. He said that they would talk later and did not understand when she would ask to fire them. He asked again what she was talking about and what the topic was, because she was his only daughter and princess, and he hoped that she would not forget about it. He couldn't understand why he felt a certain unease when he looked at her. There was a trepidation in her gaze, as if she were about to say something important, but was unsure whether to say it. He was sure his daughter was simply shy and hesitant to speak up. He believed the time had come for her to voice her desires, as he believed she needed to learn to speak up about what she truly wanted. So to dispel her doubts, he hastened to assure his daughter that she needn't worry about it. She could ask him whatever she wanted, without fear of being judged or misunderstood. The girl looked at him carefully, then nodded gratefully. She sincerely appreciated his words, and a little embarrassed, apologized for disturbing him with what she considered to be her insignificant requests. The man was surprised to see her about to leave, but Annette calmly explained that she really did have to go and asked him to consider her request. If everything worked out, she hoped he would definitely let her know. He couldn't believe she was leaving like that without saying anything important. With a hint of concern in his voice, he asked if she'd forgotten to tell him anything, as he felt something was missing from her words. And then Annette suddenly remembered what had happened the day before. Realizing this, she hastened to say that yesterday's event had apparently only pleased him, but added nothing more. Annette noticed that when she spoke to her mother, she first apologized for making her tea without permission. She knew she had done wrong, but she wanted to help, even if it meant disobeying her a little. The girl also noticed the tea she gave her mother. It was made from dried lotus flowers, and she had deliberately chosen this particular drink, knowing its properties. The Duke couldn't contain his indignation and asked what she was even talking about. After all, according to his recollections, Annette hadn't served tea, but ordinary wheat grains. The girl was surprised to hear this. She was sure he was mistaken. Lotus tea wasn't widely known, but it did provide some relief from her mother's symptoms, and that was why she had chosen it. She'd heard about this a long time ago from a pharmacist who'd accidentally shared this knowledge, but he'd also warned her that this tea shouldn't be consumed too often, despite its benefits. Lotus tea is addictive and should only be consumed in extreme cases when pain becomes unbearable. Otherwise, addiction can lead to serious consequences. This isn't a cure-all, so it shouldn't be given frequently. If the mother gets used to it, giving up the tea will be even more painful. Of course, a cure for this disease may be found someday, but there's a chance it will prove useless or arrive too late. By then, Rosanna will be gone. Even someone as self-assured and self-satisfied as she is won't be able to survive such a loss. One way or another, the pain will be too great, and one day she will follow her family. Fate has already been decided. In 5 years, Annette Aubrey will die, and 2 years later, her husband Chagall will also depart this world, leaving behind only emptiness. Annette understood perfectly well that she couldn't allow herself to become accustomed to a quiet life of warmth, care, and comfort. It was all temporary, and if she became dependent on comfort, she would one day lose herself. She is given a lifespan of 6 to 7 years. At most, her body is covered with ancient spells. In her previous incarnation, she died within 7 years when the writings covered her entire body. Annette decided it was time to go to her father and wish him a good day. She hoped this simple gesture would brighten the morning a little. The Duke was stunned. Was that all? He'd expected her to raise the issue of the maids, but she hadn't even hinted at it. Trying to make sense of the situation, the Duke turned abruptly to Pedro and asked what he was doing. He was irritated by the butler's strange behavior. Pedro calmly explained that, noticing the master's displeasure with the food, he had decided to remove it. If the Duke didn't mind, he could finish the dish himself. The Duke didn't hesitate for long and loudly ordered them to leave the food where it was and leave immediately. His voice was harsh and unyielding. Pedro just smiled silently and left the room as if not at all upset by this answer. A new thought had already occurred to him. He needed to make more tea. He knew the Duke would hardly refuse a good drink. Annette tried her best, but the result left much to be desired. She was shocked. Had she really overestimated her culinary abilities? At one time, her dishes even impressed a mad scientist, and one picky eater ate them with pleasure. So now she couldn't understand the reason for her failure. Since childhood, she had been accustomed to good food, and its taste had always been impeccable. The Aubrey family had only one heir, a boy with green hair inherited from his father and intelligent violet eyes. He had a stern military expression on his face that made him look about 13, but he was actually much older. In the twilight of the Aubrey family, a future free knight will meet a heroine with a magical gift who will change his destiny. And once again, images that seemed previously non-existent surface in her memory. They come suddenly without warning, filling her consciousness, like pieces of a mosaic fitting together to form an unknown picture. Who is the main character here, and what does all this even mean? These questions ring in her head, but there are no answers yet. Everything seems confusing, as if she's found herself in someone else's story where she doesn't know her role. Until today, they'd only glimpsed each other briefly at the dinner table. Their gazes would meet, but never even a brief conversation had ensued. It was as if they existed in the same world, but on different sides of it. But then he came up to her and said he knew who she really was. It was as if he was hinting at something important, but he didn't explain it. He merely noted that she should simply say hello and move on, as if their meeting had been unimportant. Then the boy added that he hadn't expected to see her here, the girl who had taken his sister's place. His voice rang with confusion and a hint of irritation, as if he still couldn't come to terms with this fact. And now Annette clearly understands what Enos Aubrey really is. Before he seemed to her simply an arrogant youth, but now she sees more. There's something hidden in his gaze that's not immediately obvious. Outwardly, he truly resembles a duke. His face is beautiful and cold, but behind this flawless mask hides a man who seems incapable of a genuine smile. His gaze is perpetually distant. He's clearly not happy to see her. It's evident in his every word. His hostility is so obvious that Annette decides not to prolong the meeting and simply leaves. There's no point in staying where she's not wanted. She's already exhausted, but he casts an appraising glance at her and sarcastically remarks that, even though she's dressed like a noblewoman, she still looks ridiculous, as if she's an outsider in this outfit, an outsider in this world. To him, she's just a simpleton her father brought into their home for some reason, a girl trying to pretend to be someone else, but in his opinion, failing miserably. He looks at her with a hint of mockery. Annette tries to respond, but he interrupts her before she can finish her sentence. With undisguised superiority, he remarks that she seems to have nothing to say since she hesitates so. She notes to herself that this is clearly a real talker. Not only does Enos never miss an opportunity to intervene, but he clearly enjoys it, interrupting her, without a shadow of a doubt. Then, she calmly turns to him, and looking him straight in the eye, says that if he's already had his say, she'd rather leave. She has more important things to do than argue with him. His gaze darkens, and he asks her again what she just said, but Annette isn't embarrassed. She simply points out that she's answering him in the same tone he uses when addressing her. She needs the goodwill of a few people to survive, the Duke and Duchess, but whether she needs to earn the trust of this miniature version of the Duke is a big question. The Duke, as it turns out, loves his wife more than life itself. He will never throw her out, at least for the sake of her health, which means that this boy's behavior does not pose any threat to her. It seemed he really was at home, like she was a little girl. She asked why she had to behave well if she wasn't obligated to be nice to him. The guy was surprised she still hadn't realized her true nature. After all, in his opinion, she wasn't particularly intelligent, and he certainly hadn't forced her to be nice to him. The girl quickly realized that he was the true heir to the ducal family, her own son. This added to the gravity of the situation, but she was not about to give up. Her life, she believed, would end faster than anyone else's if she didn't take action. Everything that was happening seemed unacceptable and dangerous. So she decided that revenge would be her first priority. She told him that if he thought she'd be scared, he was sorely mistaken. She noted that she wasn't afraid of him and didn't understand the power he wielded. It didn't particularly matter to her at the time. However, she hoped that he understood that she could not be driven out of here and she would remain in her position despite everything. If she suddenly disappears, she is sure that the Duchess will become much worse, and the guy does not want her health to deteriorate from worries. Her goal was to gain freedom and live the life she wanted. She was determined to prepare and act to survive and not regret it. That's why she didn't allow herself to become weak and wasn't going to tolerate some boy trampling on her and her life principles. But suddenly, she saw the anger appear on his face and realized that perhaps she had made a mistake in her words. He seemed to be really attached to the Duchess, and the thought of her suffering filled him with such a fit of rage that he could hardly contain himself. It was at that moment that she heard her mother's voice. Her older brother immediately calmed down, clearly sensing her presence. The mother asked what had happened that made them look so upset, and her question made everyone relax a little. The boy was startled when he saw his mother. He turned his attention to the girl and noticed that she immediately began smiling, as if nothing had happened. The girl smiled sincerely because she felt saved, but at the same time, she was an excellent actress who knew how to hide her emotions. Annette, without wasting any time, quickly rushed to her mother and hugged her tightly, feeling a huge sense of relief and security in this. The older brother was clearly irritated. He knew what an actress she was and couldn't help but notice her cunning. The girl, as always, played her role brilliantly. The lady, watching what was happening, asked Enos to come closer to them, hoping that he would step forward and join the family scene. Enos didn't budge, and the girl was starting to lose her patience. She couldn't imagine how stubborn this boy could be. Soon, however, he approached them, and the girl, feeling relieved, hugged him. She said she was so happy to be with her babies. Annette couldn't understand what was happening to this boy. Where was his usual arrogance and haughty face? Everything had changed in a moment. He looked completely different, and the mother, unable to contain her curiosity, decided to ask him what he had done with Annette and why she had ended up in his hands. She thought that perhaps he was trying to do something bad to the girl and decided to ask what they were talking about. The boy was at a loss. This situation had proven extremely difficult for him, and he didn't know how to get out of it without unnecessary consequences. He was scared, and despite this, the girl believed that, at that moment, she needed to intervene to clear up any misunderstandings and ease the atmosphere. The girl explained that they were simply greeting each other as expected and that nothing more happened between them than a normal greeting. He just came a little closer to gently brush a speck of dust from her curls, and that was all. The boy was in complete shock, but his mother was delighted because he was such a good and beloved brother. Now he must watch his language as best he can. The girl said that he is truly her favorite brother, and he is very good. Enos indeed confirmed that he simply wanted to brush off some dust and asked why his mother had gone out and how she was feeling. The Duchess said that, fortunately, she was much better today. I think the lotus tea really worked, but it's better not to overdo it. Now, Annette is going to see her father, and the boy must stay with his little sister and look after her while she's gone. The girl hopes everything will be okay. Before leaving, Annette said her brother had promised to show her the estate, and she was looking forward to it. It was a big deal for her. When Annette left, the girl turned to go to her room. The boy became curious and asked her where she was going, not understanding her intentions. Annette explained that she was heading to her room because she had some urgent matters to attend to and needed to be alone to deal with them. Regarding the estate, she added that there was no need to show her around, as she already knew everything. She didn't want to waste time on unnecessary walks. The guy asked in surprise if she really thought that if she behaved like this, it would lead to them becoming a real family. Annette didn't quite understand his words and was sure he already realized it was impossible. Why he kept talking about it, she couldn't understand. Then she realized he was simply afraid of losing his place. He was worried that she might take over his position in this family, and that worried him. Annette realized that he was trying to protect his position in this way, and although it seemed stupid in some way, her words still made sense. The girl calmly replied that this was not so, and smiled at him, trying to dispel his doubts and show that she would not fight for his place. She added that she could say with certainty that she had never thought about it, had never seen herself as part of this family, and had never set such goals for herself. For her family is sacred and unchanging love, but she abandoned this dream the moment she was handed over to the scientists, and she has not tried to return to it. Annette said bluntly that she would never truly become part of their family because it was impossible, and for her, it no longer mattered. The guy was completely shocked by her words and asked in bewilderment what she had just said, not believing what he had heard. The girl calmly replied that even if they asked her, she would not agree to become part of this family. She was not prepared to make such concessions. So he shouldn't worry. Her decision won't change. She definitely won't become part of his family, and he needs to accept that. The guy was in complete shock, and Annette just stood there and smiled at him, enjoying how his reaction changed to her words. Talking about family when she was only 6 or 7 years old seemed strange. Annette felt like family was something distant and vague to her. She used this family solely for revenge and decided that it was not worth playing pranks in front of her mother because now she needed to behave correctly. As Annette walked to her room, her thoughts returned to the question of family. She wondered what family meant to her. If she had seen them as family, perhaps she wouldn't have stood by knowing their days were numbered. After all, no one knew what would happen next. But for her, family is just an illusion. No matter how hard a person tries to win love, if the same blood doesn't flow in their veins, everything is in vain. Annette was sure that she couldn't receive love, and the very thought of searching for warmth within her frightened her and turned her inside out. The father turned to his eldest son and said that his manners left much to be desired. Even his younger sister behaved better. He recalled that he should have been taught proper table manners, but his behavior clearly did not correspond to this. Enos immediately apologized, realizing that the girl had mastered her manners well, and he was a little ashamed of his behavior. Annette had had her share of hardships in her life, and now she felt a bit awkward. Reminiscing about the past was difficult, but she tried to remain restrained. Father noticed that Enos even hugged his mother, knowing she was ill. His concern seemed genuine, but something still felt off. It was impossible to act so carelessly, because everyone understood perfectly well how important it was to be mindful of others' feelings. Memory played a key role here. And so it happened Enos, who should have been surrounded by love and care, grew up alone, despite all attempts to find support. At first, Annette was curious why he was so touchy, but she thinks that he lacks self-confidence. He has never received care, and it is not that he is not loved. He was always loved, and even when he was angry, his father didn't take it out on his son. He felt guilty for what was happening and worried about his own mistakes. The situation was strange, and it felt something was clearly wrong, as if her memories were jumbled and didn't provide a clear understanding of what was happening. Suddenly, memories began to flood back with unprecedented force. This was the first time this had happened. Apparently, these memories weren't exclusively from Anissa's life. Father then looked at Annette and asked what she was thinking while they were eating. He wanted to understand what was going on in her head at that moment, what she was experiencing. The girl replied with a slight smile that she simply had enough food. She was full. Her words were sincere, though they sounded a little strange. The father was puzzled by her answer, and the son also couldn't understand how she could be so full when she barely touched the food. This got them thinking. She barely touched the food, ate a couple of salads, and only 3 small bites. This seemed unnatural behavior for a child accustomed to large quantities of food. But the girl didn't understand why they were so surprised. She had eaten her fill and even asked if she needed more. For her, that was quite enough. Her father merely sighed heavily and told her to forget about it. His gaze showed he wasn't sure what to do and was trying to avoid the unpleasant conversation. He thought that she ate as much in the orphanage as she did then. But the girl confirmed that too much food gets in the way, makes the head heavy and the body clumsy. Despite this, they saw nothing wrong with her words. The girl confidently stated that it was important to attend classes and complete assignments, and that this required discipline. Discipline was also valued at the orphanage. There was a strict middle-aged man named N who praised good behavior and severely punished mistakes. The girl finished her meal and, bowing her head slightly, asked if she could go. She took the situation more simply than the others, but it seemed naive. Her father announced that a teacher would be visiting her starting this week. He reminded her that attending classes regularly was important for her future. The girl confirmed his words, agreeing. Her father was surprised by her calm and the fact that she didn't ask questions. Annette didn't quite understand why this was so important. Her father couldn't understand why Annette wasn't interested in the class schedule. He expected her to at least want to learn more about the educational process. He sincerely did not understand why the girl did not show curiosity and asked her questions, but she replied that it would not change anything. Her father was very surprised by her answer and asked her to repeat it, but Annette confidently replied, "Of course not. It didn't matter." The girl added that she doesn't understand why people ask such questions if nothing will change anyway, but she stands by her opinion. Her father waved his hand and told her to just forget about these questions. It was clear he was a little worried. Annette asked if she could walk through the offices, and her father, surprised, asked again if she meant his office. The girl confirmed that she meant his office and that it would be her first time there as she had never been there before. In this life and in the past, Annetta had never ventured beyond her familiar surroundings. This was something new and unusual for her. She felt a little awkward, but said that if she couldn't do it, she would understand it wouldn't be a big deal if they forbade it. Father seemed to remember someone saying it was forbidden, but he thanked her for her understanding. In the end, it didn't really matter. He said that if she wanted, she could come tomorrow. Annette happily agreed, feeling that everything would work out. The girl thanked him for permission and noticed that he looked a little embarrassed, as if he had not expected her to ask such a thing. At the end, he added that perhaps he would allow it, after all. His words weren't entirely confident, but there was still some hope in them, as if he were willing to consider her request. The girl didn't quite understand what exactly he wanted from her, but she decided to act as if he was simply embarrassed and didn't know what to do at that moment. She still hoped he wouldn't force her to do anything she didn't want to do. This hope was her only consolation, as she found this moment unpleasant to relive. Perhaps he'd change his mind tomorrow if he was free, and she could get permission. She lived with that thought, hoping that everything would be resolved without any problems. After that, she turned to her father. He, noticing her gaze, turned to her, ready to listen to what she had to say. She clearly had something in mind and couldn't remain silent. Annette noticed that her father seemed busy, but the thought of asking him to take her to the capital still crossed her mind. She couldn't pass up such an opportunity. The Duke replied that nothing could be done about it, but warned her not to expect anything special. He didn't want her to get her hopes up too high, despite the fact that she was irritated by all these people who were constantly around. The father couldn't refuse his daughter, even if he didn't like it. This was an immutable rule. However, the girl felt this was going too far. When she looked at her brother, his face expressed obvious displeasure, and this gave her pause. She was at a loss, unsure what to do next. A feeling of uncertainty arose within her, and she didn't know how to handle this situation or what to decide first. Then she stood up and left, leaving behind a strange doubt. This doubt remained with her, as she left sensing that something in her actions was not quite right. Her brother came up behind her and said she seemed to be enjoying all this fake drama. He thought she was trying to get her father's attention and was trying her best to become part of their family. His father never took him to the capital. The girl said she could go, but the Duchess's intervention led to a misunderstanding, and everything turned out to be much more complicated than she thought. She could have tried to explain herself, but no one knew what the consequences might be. The issue remained open, and there was no immediate solution. She didn't want to get into a silly argument with her brother, as it was clear he didn't share her point of view. She would rather avoid conflict and find another solution. Duke Aubrey cared for his son in his own way, and there was no point in dwelling on it too much. She tried to reassure herself, knowing that his approach to such matters was different. So she said she had plans for tomorrow. However, in 2 days, she was going to show him how much her father loved him, trying to prove her point. He still didn't understand what she was talking about. It was a mystery to him, and he couldn't figure out what she was trying to convey. There was only bewilderment in his eyes. The girl lowered her gaze and confidently said that if she could prove anything, he would have to stop being angry with her. This was an important condition for her. Annette decided to find out if her father had a special place where he often went for walks in order to get some information about his habits and preferences. She was sure that she was very good at recognizing when dishonest people began to show their true side, and the guy said that his favorite place was the pond in the garden. He often walks by the pond, and this seemed like him. Annette thanked him for the information, suggesting they meet there the next day after breakfast to discuss important matters. The guy, noticing her intentions, asked what she was planning, and whether she was planning to deceive him again. Annette replied that she simply wanted to explain everything. She wanted to convince her brother that there was no reason to remain angry with her, and this was very important to her. The girl was determined to do so. It wasn't that simple, but she hoped that everything would become clear in the future, and their meeting tomorrow would help resolve all misunderstandings and conflicts. However, Annette decided to put off all matters until tomorrow and focus on more pressing matters related to the Duke and her plans. Annette was aware of many facts about Duke Aubrey's future, and his life she knew well what lay ahead for him. In her past life, she read all the newspapers. The mad scientist kept studying them from beginning to end. They were full of information. However, Annette wasn't sure if it mentioned anything about the Duke's past. She was almost certain there was, but she knew exactly how he would die. But the most interesting thing was how she learned that Chagall Aubrey was the third son in his family, had experienced a difficult childhood, became distrustful, and loved his son. The newspaper might report facts, but it said almost nothing about his personal life, and how she knew for sure that he would sacrifice himself for his son remained a mystery. The girl herself couldn't understand where she had gotten so much information. She didn't remember the details, but she knew it all too clearly, and it was confusing. When she tried to recall something from the past, it seemed her memories were incomplete. Her head was empty, as if someone had removed everything important, leaving only a song that never played. Suddenly, a bright light flashed before her. She was confused, not understanding what was happening, and tried to comprehend where she was and why everything was so strange. The world around her disappeared, leaving only the unknown. Her gaze fell on the magical seal that had appeared right in front of her. It was something unusual, and she couldn't figure out where it had come from. She felt as if everything around her was unfamiliar. Panicked, she began to fidget, unsure what to do. There were too many questions in her head, but she couldn't answer them. Everything was happening so quickly that she didn't have time to process what it all meant. Soon she found herself in a space that resembled a vast white field. She felt utter terror because she realized she was definitely not home. This was a place, but something was wrong with it. Suddenly, her soul felt drawn into some dark void, as if something invisible were pulling her into the unknown. The sensation was so strong that she couldn't shake it. She tried to figure out this strange space surrounding her, a white abyss, as if she were caught between worlds, and she had no idea what it was or what was happening to her. A black silhouette appeared in the darkness. It stood nearby, staring intently at her. It was a shadow emanating a sense of something ominous and unfamiliar. She began frantically looking around, trying to figure out what it was. Perhaps it was just an illusion, but her senses were right, and she felt that everything around her was alive and real. Suddenly, a loud sound burst into her ears, as if someone had turned up the volume on a loudspeaker. It was the boy's voice, realizing his mistake, and realizing he'd been speaking too loudly to her. He tried to calm down, and in a quieter voice, asked her to tell him how she felt about his speech. Now he was having a hard time adjusting to the new conditions, but he still hoped she would understand. The girl responded with difficulty that she felt better now, but she couldn't understand everything that was happening. He, in turn, was overjoyed because they had finally met. Annette, completely confused about who was standing in front of her and where she was, asked the guy about it. He replied that he was just an administrator and that the situation would be strange for her. The girl looked at him in confusion, not understanding what was happening. He said it was an archive, but that only confused her even more. She couldn't understand what he was talking about. She was the only person in the archive who could enter it. She still couldn't figure out what this place was. If it was an archive, then why was it so empty? Why was there so little information, and what was the point? The questions remained unanswered. The young man, noticing her confusion, advised her to take a closer look. He assured her that the archive was not empty at all, and that it held much more than she thought. Suddenly, books began appearing around Annette, and she realized she was in a library surrounded by a vast amount of material and knowledge. It was far more impressive than she had expected. The guy told her that the pages of these books contained the entire truth about this world, all its secrets and mysteries. He thought she would want to read them and uncover this truth. However, the girl could not choose where to start because all the books were similar, their covers were the same, and she could not understand which of them would be useful to her. But soon, her gaze fell on one book that was different from the rest. It had a completely different cover, which caught Annette's attention. He told her to read it specifically because this book was quite interesting and could provide answers to the important questions she was looking for. No longer surprised by anything, Annette opened the book. It contained a story about the event of August 8, 2019, a date that proved significant in her life. The book said she was robbed by con artists and died shortly afterward when she was taken on a white bus on the day of her walk. It sounded horrific and tragic. Annette sighed heavily. The boy added that the rest of the text was written in a long-forgotten language, and she wouldn't be able to read it because she didn't have the necessary abilities. She was not prepared to comprehend such complex texts as she did not have the skills to decipher the ancient language in which the story continued. He said something really interesting was coming, but the girl didn't understand what exactly he meant. She felt something important was about to happen. She tried to understand why the guy was so insistent on keeping her eyes forward, even though it all seemed strange, but he kept repeating that she needed to be prepared for something important. And then she noticed how the book began to move on its own. It was completely impossible and astonishing to her. She couldn't take her eyes off this phenomenon. When Annette's gaze fell on one of the pages, she saw the date, February 17th, 2016, and the note said that this day was the most important and best. It told of Duke Chagall Aubrey, who wounded himself to save his son. It was a heroic deed, but in the world of books, there are no such heroes anymore. After all, in real life, things are different. It was sad to realize that Duke Chagall would no longer appear in the story. People in real life are often greedy, and their thoughts are preoccupied only with how to take other people's money. From what she read, Annette realized the diary's author was sharing his impressions of a romance with green eyes. She continued reading, trying to understand more about the meaning of these entries. The reviews of the book seemed ordinary, but one passage mentioned Duke Aubrey's house. This was odd, as the house might have hidden more than it seemed at first glance. The notes said his daughter had been missing, but he'd found her one day in an orphanage. This event was deeply disconcerting and thought-provoking. The main character and a character named Key remained a mystery to her. She couldn't figure out who they were or what was going on in this strange book that was confusing her thoughts. And suddenly, the book literally pushed her away, like an electric shock. The administrator explained that the story was too complex and it was too early for Annette to delve too deeply into its details. Annette couldn't resist asking what kind of book it was. Her curiosity was growing stronger, and she felt like it was hiding something important about her life. The guy replied that the book reflected her life, but in an abridged form. It was her own story, but without the details, without the things that could have changed everything. The girl didn't understand what was happening to her. Of course, she couldn't understand it, because it was connected to her past, and looking into it was strictly forbidden. She was one of those who lived through many lives. Each new existence is a new chance, but past lives are never forgotten, remaining in her soul. This book contained all her past lives, and although she remembered nothing about them, her soul knew them everywhere, every event, every step she had ever taken. She couldn't remember what had happened before, but her soul kept everything within itself, every detail, every mistake, and every correction that had happened in her many lives. At that moment, the girl began to reflect on her past. The administrator explained that the archive was accessible to everyone, but only those who had already survived death and held the key could access it. The girl was stunned and rushed to find out what the key was. The administrator explained that the magic circle on her wrist was the very key, a symbol of forbidden magic. He assured her that there was no need to be afraid of this, because the key was on her side, and it would not cause any harm. She just needed to relax a little and not worry without reason. The administrator announced that it was time for him to leave and said goodbye to her, noting that many things would remain undisclosed until the next meeting. He reminded her that they would still have plenty of time and advised her to be careful, as such meetings could have unexpected consequences. Finally, he said that the first meeting should always be short, otherwise it will be difficult to understand what is happening and it may become too complex to perceive. The girl began to feel herself falling rapidly, but before she could say goodbye, she managed to see the guy waving his hand at her, disappearing into the distance. However, instead of falling, she simply opened her eyes and found herself lying on her bed as if nothing had happened. When she got out of bed, she felt unbearably ill, as if something was wrong, and her body responded painfully to what was happening. At this moment, the maid entered the room and presented her with a new dress, which she thought would be perfect for the following day. The girl only smiled in response and didn't know what to say. Her thoughts were preoccupied with something completely different, and words wouldn't come to mind. The girl named Annette finally remembered she was supposed to be a sweet girl and said with a smile that she thought she was very beautiful. She was trying not to miss the moment. The maid, observing Annette, remarked that she thought the sailor's uniform would look absolutely perfect on her. A debate immediately ensued among the maids about what dress to choose for their mistress. Annette felt disappointed as the argument about what to wear had flared up again. She decided not to waste time and suggested that it would be better if she chose the outfit herself. Annette knew perfectly well that Mary was strict and decisive, but at first she found Golda quiet and modest. However, she soon realized that the two girls were truly as alike as twins. The girls couldn't hide their admiration. The dress suited Milady perfectly beautifully, accentuating her style, and especially complementing her hair color. She walked toward her father, feeling that emerald shades suited her. Judging by all the compliments, she truly nailed the role of the Duke's daughter, looking flawless. The girl smiled, surprised by how much she resembled her father. This discovery pleasantly surprised her. They found it extremely touching and were happy that their mistress had returned home. However, Mary and Golda faced a different situation, and now she was saying goodbye to them. It was an important farewell, one she had come to terms with. At first, the girls did not understand what this farewell actually meant, but then they simply said goodbye to the lady, accepting everything as it was, without unnecessary words. Annette didn't have time to process all the events that had transpired. She lost consciousness and only woke up the next morning, when her thoughts were still in disarray. She asked the Duke for permission to go for a walk. She wanted some time alone to gather her thoughts and understand what was happening around her. As she walked, she began to wonder who Key was. At some point, it became clear to her that she was inside a novel, and she was one of the main characters. She remembered reading this novel, but she hadn't known life could change so drastically. She remembered the emerald eyes, if of course, what she'd been told was true. Perhaps Key is the Duke's real daughter, and she should be the main character of this story. Annette's thoughts persisted, and she became increasingly immersed in this possibility. Thinking back to her past life, she recalled a newspaper article. It told of a duke taking his daughter from an Iranian orphanage. It was thought-provoking. She didn't even realize she'd taken someone else's place in this life. Her father noticed her lateness and expressed concern that she hadn't arrived on time. He also remarked that she looked especially lovely today. Perhaps it was the elegant new dress she'd donned, unaware of its effect. The girl thanked him, saying it was all thanks to him. Her words were sincere. She felt grateful for everything he had done for her, but she still didn't understand why he was so silent. And at some point she realized it, but she didn't want to say it out loud because it was difficult. Duke Aubrey turned out to be much more considerate and intelligent than she thought. This made her think, and she felt that her theory wasn't so crazy after all. She finally had to say it out loud. Trying to muster up her courage, she said that Dad looked even better today, despite all her doubts. The girl spoke these words with a good-natured smile, and the Duke, glancing at her, noted that everything remained the same. That familiar tone, that lightness in her voice, everything matched his expectations. She was sure that this was exactly the answer she needed, so as not to raise unnecessary questions. Having concluded their conversation, they calmly climbed into the carriage, giving no indication that anything more was hidden behind their words. The Duke had a lot of work to do and could have refused the trip, but it seemed he needed the rest himself. His behavior revealed that deep down, he missed his daughter. But Annette knew her position. Her presence here was temporary, and if she became too absorbed in her role, she could easily lose even this chance. If she got carried away, she'd simply be thrown out. The Duke, without showing any particular emotion, asked the girl where she would like to go. Apparently, he decided to let her choose her own activities that day. Annette thought for a moment, then replied that she just wanted to go for a walk and feel free. She also suggested going clothing shopping or going out to eat. The Duke narrowed his eyes and asked if this was truly what she wanted. The girl nodded without hesitation, showing it wasn't a casual remark. She understood he was considering her wishes. It didn't matter to her where they went. Children usually rejoice at such things, but the Duke clearly saw it differently. Contrary to her expectations, the walk was bound to remind her once again that this world is built on power and money. In one of the boutiques, Annette spotted a charming pink dress and with a mischievous smile told her father she liked it. Afterward, with obvious delight, she asked him to buy out the entire toy store and a whole collection of similar dresses. The Duke noted with a slight smile that his only daughter was not without courage. She expressed her desires without hesitation, and this even amused him a little. That's exactly how he believed money should be spent, confidently, without regard for the consequences. At that moment, he was completely satisfied with her behavior, seeing in it the right attitude. However, his face betrayed no true emotion. Even if he was pleased, there was no genuine joy in his eyes. Rather, a slight shadow of disappointment crossed his features. Annette couldn't understand why she couldn't please her father. She simply begged for a little candy, hoping for a little weakness on his part. The father thought this was very stupid. His daughter was thinking only about food all the time. Excited, he told her that their next destination was jewelry stores. Annette, smiling, replied that she hadn't really thought about it. She just wanted to enjoy the walk, spend time with her father, and see the capital. She had never been to the capital before, and everything here was new and surprising to her. Every corner seemed unusual and full of adventure. The father was silent for a moment, and then admitted that if his daughter wanted something, he couldn't refuse her. His heart softened when she asked for something. Annette didn't even have to persuade him for long, although he always tried to remain stern. He knew that here in the capital, he shouldn't be harsh. She suggested with a smile that perhaps it was time to return to the carriage. She needed to go before her father changed his mind and started reminding her of other duties. Once in the carriage, Annette wondered if they could return all the purchases they'd made. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty about whether they'd made the right choice. Her father couldn't believe his ears when he heard her proposal. He could barely contain his indignation, but he was willing to compromise for his daughter's sake. Annette shared that she was actually sad. She thought it would be nice to give a gift to others, but she felt she wouldn't be able to use it. Her eyes darkened at the thought that in 5 years, she would no longer be around, so buying things she wouldn't be able to wear seemed too sad. Her father replied reservedly that she could always take these things with her. It was a compromise of sorts, but he didn't want to upset her further. Annette couldn't understand how this would be possible, since the clothes would be too small for her in a few years. She couldn't imagine how she would use all of this. Her father replied with a smile that in that case she could just get rid of them. However, that didn't change how she felt. Everything was too complicated. Meanwhile, their trip had come to an end, and he announced that they had already arrived. Annette felt a slight sense of relief that it was finally over. As she was getting out of the carriage, the Duke offered her his hand to help her down. Annette was surprised, but nevertheless accepted his gesture. She finally agreed, though she was a little taken aback by all the attention. It was unexpected, but at some point she felt she could trust him. The Duke offered her his hand as they boarded the carriage. He was not rude, and his manners, though not entirely refined, were respectable. She noticed that he always walked ahead, and she began to like it. Everything around her seemed to fall into place, and she gradually became accustomed to her new role. Annette wanted to grab his hand, but a sudden noise made her turn around. Her gaze fell on what was happening in the distance. Clearly something had happened, something that demanded attention. The girl froze, stunned by what she saw. Her heart began to beat faster. However, the Duke standing nearby simply turned away, as if he was completely uninterested in all this. Gradually, her consciousness began to piece together the puzzle pieces. It was something familiar, something from the past that she couldn't quite place, but the feeling of unease was growing. A man standing in the crowd shouted loudly that he had irrefutable proof. He assured everyone that the mad scientist thought dead was actually alive. The Duke called out to his daughter, trying to distract her from what was happening. But Annette didn't even move. She continued to watch, her gaze riveted on the scene before her. The focus was on a creature, a chimera, a lab specimen created specifically for murder. It was something artificially bred, not native to the human world. The man continued shouting, explaining that he had purchased the creature for a huge sum of money. He claimed he had been promised a rare specimen, but now he clearly had no idea what he was dealing with. Annette felt something tighten inside her. She recognized this creature. Yes, before her was indeed a chimera, the product of the horrific experiments she had once heard about. A scientist once conducted a dangerous experiment attempting to create a creature for murder. He used methods bordering on divine deception to create something devoid of a soul. At first, the project was surrounded by talk and rumors. However, the creature turned out to have low intelligence and then began to disintegrate completely, as if incapable of existence. Nevertheless, the chimera continued to rebel, though it seemed unaware of its actions. It moved erratically, as if unaware of what was happening around it. The experiment had clearly failed. Instead of a ruthless killer, they found themselves confronted by something that looked completely harmless, even cute if you didn't know how it came into being. The Duke looked closely at the girl, but couldn't figure out what was happening to her. Her gaze was too intense, almost unnatural. Then he realized she was clearly not herself. Her father, noticing her distress, gently asked if she wanted anything. He assured her that he was ready to fulfill any wish, If only she would ask. Annette wondered what he meant, since they'd already visited all the stores. What else could he offer? She became curious about what her father was planning to buy her. The girl replied with a smile that everything her father had already bought her was quite enough. She felt content and didn't want to ask for anything more. It was the first time she'd walked so freely through the capital, without unnecessary restrictions. She was especially pleased that today, for the first time, someone had offered her a hand as an equal, not as a child. Annette thought a simple girl would probably say that was enough for her, so she easily said that she owed everything to her dear daddy's care. Then she suggested that they go home quickly because she just wanted to take a walk, and now that was enough. Her father looked at her incredulously, not believing she was truly happy with everything, but since she insisted, he agreed to leave, even though he still had to hold her hand. He remarked that she needed to get out of the house more often, to which the girl only giggled cheerfully, without giving any answer. Her gaze slid over the strange rose-like creature. Suddenly she felt sad. Before her was a creature abandoned by a mad scientist. It would be an exaggeration to say that this creature resembled the previous main character, but some vague features were still similar. The elder brother arrived at the appointed place. As always, his younger sister had called him here, and he had come reluctantly, nonetheless. He was told the meeting was necessary to prove his father loved him more. He didn't understand what kind of absurd statements these were, and why he needed to prove anything at all. Yes, his father had always been strict with him, but for some reason, he'd gone to the capital with this girl. He couldn't understand what was happening, and was angry at this strange joke, as if someone had simply taken away his parental love. She dared to marry you off to this guy's younger sister, the one whose lilac eyes seemed like something out of a fairy tale. He couldn't understand how she had suddenly ended up in her place, and why his ailing mother had suddenly become part of this conversation. Remembering his little sister, he felt a strange uneasiness. Was she still alive? He soon met the girl, and her surprise at his arrival was noticeable. She hadn't expected him to show up, but here he was. The boy noticed he was already seriously considering returning. It was all starting to seem too complicated, but he wasn't about to give up just yet. The girl suddenly asked him if he wanted to know if his father loved him, but the boy merely shook his head and answered briefly. His father was incapable of love. She was already tired of these conversations. Everything was repeated over and over again, and he still couldn't understand the obvious. Time was running out. She looked at her brother and asked if he now knew the easiest way to achieve love. He frowned, not understanding where she was going with this. The girl merely remarked that sometimes circumstances are such that people can't control their emotions no matter how strong they are. "That's why you're going to die," she said, approaching. But her voice was calm. When she was very close, she quietly asked him to just play along with her for a little while. He didn't understand anything. He couldn't fathom what she was planning, but the girl continued assuring him that it wasn't his fault at all. The guy frowned and asked her to stop. She smiled and promised she wouldn't do it again. "If father rushes to save you first, then I've won," she explained, and there was a strange determination in her voice. "And if I win, you'll finally leave me alone," she added, as if putting an end to the conversation. There was a lot of water. It seemed frighteningly deep, and its icy coldness penetrated to the bones. The father, seeing his eldest son drowning, jumped into the water without a second thought. He knew his son couldn't swim, and fear for his child overshadowed everything else. He rowed toward him with all his might, heedless of his own safety. Annette, watching this, couldn't understand why her father was so scared. Could water really be so scary? After all, they were just playing, and nothing bad had happened. The father, reaching his son, grabbed him and pulled him ashore. He immediately examined him, asking if he was injured. Not waiting for a clear answer, he hastened to say that he would call a doctor immediately. The boy opened his mouth, trying to explain, but his father didn't let him say a word. He was too angry and shocked to listen to his excuses. His anger exploded. He screamed, demanding an explanation. How could his son have decided to take such a step knowing he couldn't swim? Where was he going, and what was he even planning to do? The father couldn't understand why he'd gone into the water when he couldn't stay afloat, but instead of answering, the son suddenly asked how his father knew about it. The man just chuckled. Did his son really think his father didn't know? He'd ordered him to stay here and wait while he brought the doctor. The boy realized there was no point in arguing now. His father had just saved him, but he'd never seen him so furious. It was even more terrifying than the water itself. But the father wouldn't calm down. He again demanded an explanation of how his son ended up in the water and why he allowed it to happen in the first place. The guy, realizing there was no point in hiding it, admitted he'd been with Annette. They'd just been playing, and somehow they'd both ended up in the water. Hearing this, the Duke was shocked. He was literally dumbfounded, unable to believe his ears. It wasn't just fear, it was sheer shock. When he looked down at the water, the surface was calm, revealing nothing unusual. No disturbances, no tracks, just emptiness as if nothing had happened. Annette was in the icy water at the time, feeling the cold penetrate her body, but even through her trembling and fear, she noticed the Duke running toward them, so her brother was saved. However, contrary to her expectations, he didn't stop next to her, didn't look at her, but simply ran on, seemingly unaware of her presence. Annette wanted to escape something oppressive, but she couldn't understand why things had turned out this way. Only when she was in the water did she suddenly realize she couldn't swim either. Despite this, she felt victorious. Although it was difficult to say exactly what that victory consisted of, she couldn't help but wonder how she even knew the guy couldn't swim. Where and when could she have learned that? Her mind was filled with new information emerging from nowhere, and it was hard to get used to. In the cold water, Annette wondered, what if she died right now? What would happen then? Then there would be no more despair, no more pain, only peace, serenity, silence, and comfort. But at that moment, when these thoughts were still floating in her head, she suddenly felt that someone grabbed her. Her surprise knew no bounds when she opened her eyes and realized that she was no longer in the water. She survived. The Duke looked at her with horror, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Annette quietly apologized, explaining that they were simply playing where they shouldn't have. Annette was sure her father had already scolded Enos for what had happened, but it turned out the boy really couldn't swim, so why was he staring at her so intently? Their mistake could have turned into tragedy, and the realization sent shivers down their spine. Father merely said that this conversation was still to come, but his gaze made it clear the consequences would be immediate. The Duke ordered her to go home immediately and warm up while he fetched a doctor. A warm bath was supposed to help her recover, but Annette didn't understand the fuss. She felt fine and didn't understand why she had to lie in her room for 5 days. However, the maids were adamant. It was an order, and it wasn't up for debate, no matter how much she wanted to protest. The doctor tried to explain that her condition was more dangerous than it seemed. It seemed she had completely forgotten who she was. The Duke's heir couldn't afford to be frivolous. Realizing this, she decided to obey. It was all clear, but why did he have to be in her room? The thought filled her with a vague sense of unease. As she climbed the stairs, she was still wondering what was wrong with her brother. Why did his gaze seem so strange and piercing? However, this could be seen as a truce. If he wanted to look at her that way, so be it. With time, she would get used to it and stop paying attention to it. She really thought so. But 4 days later, she realized it was a mistake. She was forbidden to leave the house for another 3 days, and Duke Aubrey watched her literally every step of the way. It all felt like imprisonment, and Annette was beginning to suffocate in this prison. Eating, changing clothes, playing, and studying, it all resembled caring for a child who had just turned 3. The nannies never left her side, trying to please her in every way. Annette didn't know how long this would last, but she could already feel her nerves fraying. Every day was the same, with no end in sight. Her patience was gradually wearing thin. But that wasn't even the worst part. She was worried about her brother, who for some reason had started looking at her strangely. That look made her feel uneasy. Finally, she decided to ask him a direct question, but in response, she heard that she imagined he wasn't even looking at her. It sounded unconvincing. Chagall and Annette Aubrey also kept their eyes on her, even when she was simply eating. It seemed they did this deliberately to irritate her. As soon as she told him she was already better, he just waved her off, not listening, and immediately asked if she needed a doctor. If this continued, she'd soon be glued to her chair. Finally, her father admitted that she looked healthier now. It seemed like good news, but it didn't change anything. He said he'd come see her again after work, but for now, it would be best for her to stay in her room. It sounded more like an order than a request. Annette was already growing tired of his visits, and increasingly wished he would stop coming. Although there was some relief in this. At that moment, her brother suddenly asked her what she was thinking on the day she risked her life. He clearly didn't understand why she would take such a dangerous step. The girl assumed he was simply complaining and quickly apologized. She assured him she had had a well-thought-out plan and there was no real danger. But her brother suddenly flared up. He started screaming, reminding her that she had almost died. His reaction even left her slightly taken aback. Annette admitted she'd made a mistake. But anything can happen. But her brother only became more angry, demanding to know why she'd gone into the water if she couldn't swim. The girl calmly replied that she simply wanted to get away from him. Her tone was indifferent, but her brother was not reassured. He was too upset because everything could have ended in tragedy because of such a trifle. The thought of it haunted him. The girl was completely stunned by his words. And how strange he looked. It was so unexpected that she couldn't immediately understand what was happening, and his behavior only confused her. She noticed he looked different. His eyes were red, as if he'd just been crying. Concerned, she decided to ask him again if he was hiding something, as his expression clearly betrayed his distress. But the guy, noticing her gaze, abruptly covered his face and said he wasn't really crying. He was trying to reassure her he was fine, even though his appearance said otherwise. The girl, not understanding what was really happening, asked herself, if these weren't tears, then what were they? She realized that Enos was once again remaining true to his principles, but she still noticed that her father had made it clear he loved him. The boy, hearing her, confirmed her words, adding that she was right. However, he immediately told her not to worry, but in response, he reminded her that when he had rescued him, he had jumped into the water without hesitation to help. The girl, however, disagreed. She said there was nothing surprising about it, since it was simply the garden of the Duke's estate. No one could be allowed to drown there, as everyone had a duty to look after each other. The boy, disagreeing, replied that that wasn't the point. He explained that he'd never seen his father run after someone so desperately. It was more than just duty, it was clearly a genuine impulse. He understood what this meant, and realizing it added that he cared about her, he even decided he needed to apologize to his sister for once calling her a fake sister. It was a gesture of sincerity and regret. The girl, hearing this, didn't believe it at first. She reminded him that he hadn't called her that in a long time, but the boy, smiling, said that he now officially declared her his little sister, and that this was his final choice. The girl didn't understand why she needed the golden one, since she had already promised that she wouldn't bother him, but he understood that she was flattered and that she had some kind of honor in having the best brother in the world. He smiled, but she didn't think it was necessary. She felt like she'd seen this reaction somewhere before. It all felt familiar, as if she'd experienced it before. She recalled the Duke's words about being the best father in the world. His confidence was as clear as it had been when he said it, completely believing it. She remarked that she could do as she pleased, and there was nothing surprising about that. During the meal, the mother turned to the children, informing them that she had heard about their fall into the pond. Mother asked if they had caught a cold, to which the children replied that they were fine. Their faces lit up, and this calmed everyone at the table. Mother was delighted and invited everyone to join her for the meal. She happily took a spoonful of soup, and the aroma of food filled the air, heralding the start of the long-awaited meal. She savored the taste of the food. It had been a while since she'd sat at the table with salad and soup, which she enjoyed so much. The taste was unparalleled, and she devoured every spoonful with relish. But then, feeling full, she realized it was time to stop. Her stomach was full, and the thought of stopping came naturally. The mother noticed that the girl had stopped eating, and she was surprised. She asked if Annette was succumbing to illness, but Annette had just felt that the food wasn't to her liking. But the girl said that this was enough for her. It's just that when she eats before goodbye, she becomes slow like a snail. And in their shelter, you can't be like that, because immediately after eating, you have to earn money. There aren't enough staff. It seems she has been talking too much, but now she is at home, and her mom and dad are with her. Probably now she can only eat as much as she wants. Her mom noted that if she doesn't want more, then she doesn't have to go. Well, the girl said that it was very tasty for her. After all this, she was lying in her bed. She had overeaten. It seemed she had eaten a whole 1.5 portions, and in fact, she wanted to go for a walk today and find out about the chimera. Annette thought it would be better to go alone, but now she was lost in thought, unsure of what to do. She couldn't sort out her feelings, and this troubled her. But after much deliberation, Annette concluded there was no point in continuing such futile speculation. She simply needed to act. Having decided so, she called the maids to convey her request. The girl announced she wanted to go for a walk and hoped they would allow her. She eagerly awaited a response, as a walk seemed essential at that moment. The maid was surprised that Annette had decided to talk to her now, as she had her own plans. She had hoped the girl was planning to visit the capital, which was a bit of a surprise. Then the maid said that they would then pack her for the trip, and she was shocked that they did not agree, because she thought that without the Duke's permission, she could not go anywhere. The carriage ride to the store was quick. The girl watched the road, carefully dreaming of the purchase she wanted to make. Soon they were there. The girl told the maids she would be entering the store alone and asked them to wait outside. She was determined and didn't want anyone to accompany her. The maids insisted on going with her, but the mistress refused. She promised to return in a little while, but for now they could watch her through the window. One of the maids, still expressing concern, asked her mistress to return as soon as possible once she had finished shopping. They were worried about her left alone. When the girl entered the store, she immediately realized the chimera was weakened. It was obvious the animal hadn't been properly cared for. This upset her. The girl wondered why they wanted to let her go here alone. Apparently Mary and the starvation were hoping she'd get through this quickly, but the shopkeeper had already started keeping an eye on her. The salesman approached her and curiously asked what she wanted. He looked closely at her face and noticed that someone was watching her. The girl found what she was looking for, and the seller remarked that she had a strange look in her eyes. He said that the rare animal she was looking for had recently arrived. The seller said he'd already started training the animal, but the girl could do it her own way. He was confident she could handle the training. The girl felt the animal looked ill, and she had a feeling it was about to die. The chimera's condition greatly worried her. She didn't know what to do. The man said the animal was just sleepy and had just woken up. However, the girl immediately realized he was trying to deceive her and confidently declared the animal was clearly not well. She wanted to know how much he was willing to sell it for. The gentleman replied that it was a very rare and expensive species, so its price was approximately 5 million. He hoped the price would justify the animal's quality despite its condition. The girl considered the amount equal to a family of four's monthly expenses too high, especially since the seller clearly hadn't taken good care of the animal. She knew paying that much for such a pet was a bad idea. The girl then decided to check whether he had imported the animal legally, as such animals require special permits. She needed to determine whether he was breaking the law in this matter. It's all because they can't be sold anywhere, so she asks for documents. When he was confused, she asked if he really did it illegally. She was interested in how much she would get for reporting him to the authorities. He said that she shouldn't do this. She could take him for 3 million, but the girl started saying that he was sick and she would spend more on the vet. She didn't have that much money. She could give him no more than 300,000. The man tried to say that he would be left with nothing, to which the girl replied that this meant that he did not want to negotiate, and therefore she would give him 3 million, and then they would report him and return for her animal. The man did not agree to this, so he immediately told her to take it for 300,000, and she said that she was very glad that he agreed. Then she would come back in a week. The man was further shocked that she wasn't taking him now. The woman asked again what would happen if the animal infected her, and then her father came back to smash his store. He probably doesn't like this. Of course, she's not going to tell the Duke. Well, she got sick and that's it. To tell the truth, she simply doesn't have the money. It seems she will have to sell dresses and jewelry that do not belong to her, and she does not dare to ask the Duke for money. The girl promised to return a week later. She asked him to ensure the animal was still alive when she returned. To do this, she needed to find the necessary funds by any means necessary. This creature, a chimera, could become a powerful weapon in her hands. She knew that this unusual and intelligent creature could play a decisive role in her future plans. The girl intended to train and raise the chimera. She would train it to become a loyal assistant and ally when it grew up, able to help her in the most difficult situations. That seems to be all. The girl truly demonstrated determination. She made a decision, and this decision was not only important, but also difficult for her future. The gentleman asked again if this really meant that as soon as dinner was over, the girl immediately went out to look at the beast. He wanted to know what she had decided. The maid confirmed his words. The master remarked that if she had so strongly desired to see him, she could have done so back then, immediately after the meal, without any unnecessary waiting. However, the maid perked up a bit, replying that he was worrying too much. He probably had many thoughts on the matter, but she immediately came to tell His Excellency what had happened. The gentleman thought for a moment and said that perhaps that was true. In any case, he reminded her that she had a child to care for. His trust in her was based on her abilities. He had not entrusted her with the care of the child for nothing, and the maid understood that she was obliged to carry out all his instructions. She nodded and promised not to let him down by following all his instructions. After all, it was their family's loyal coachman Choi Young, who was capable of outperforming approximately 20 ordinary coachmen, although it was a bit impulsive to hire the elite Mary and Golda. The girl couldn't directly express her wants and needs. She was too shy and unsure of herself to say what she needed or wanted. It felt like she was always hiding something. At this time, he eagerly awaited the delicious meal the chef was preparing. He was eager to try dishes worthy of a true gourmet, prepared to the highest standards. Suddenly, however, someone knocked on the door. He gave permission to enter, and a huge woman burst in. Her appearance clearly disrupted his peace and the calm atmosphere that had reigned until that moment. Apparently, the gentleman had told her to pay attention to important matters in the mansion. He knew that the woman kept a close eye on everything that happened in the house and always intervened promptly if something required her attention. The woman noticed that he must have been calling her, as she hadn't been in his room in a while. The taste of his food had improved significantly in recent days, especially the meat. She clearly noticed the changes and the improvements. She added that this was undoubtedly the gentleman's doing. She believed he had called her not to compliment the food, but to discuss more pressing matters that required her intervention. The gentleman noted with some surprise that she already knew his daughter was coming home. This could mean she'd show up soon and ask for a favor, as had happened before. He was prepared for this. The woman surprised by this asked when she would be returning. Her interest was genuine, knowing how closely his daughter was connected to the house and how excited she always was when she visited. The gentleman smiled and remarked that his daughter was incredibly sweet and very happy. He said he didn't know the exact date of her arrival, but he assumed she would arrive soon, and then everything would change again. She had prepared a light meal suitable for her daughter in advance. However, the woman noted that perhaps this was because she was asleep at the time and unable to cook for herself, so her assistance was limited. The gentleman was a little surprised and assumed the sous chef had prepared it, as he must have the necessary culinary skills for this. But the woman confidently insisted that it had been prepared by the lady herself. When he learned it was her, he was deeply shocked. He didn't expect her to be able to cook such complex and delicious food on her own. This changed his opinion of her culinary abilities. The woman explained that the meat turned out so tender and flavorful thanks to a special recipe given by the mistress, and it seemed he truly believed she was the creator of this magnificent dish. After these words, the Duke angrily shouted at her to leave. The woman in turn noted that he might have spoken rather harshly, especially before the dishes his mistress was preparing. The gentleman repeated that he had told her to get out, and it seemed she wanted to lose her job. The woman told him to try firing her. He wouldn't find a cook anywhere else who could satisfy his every whim. They brought him some suspicious food, which it turned out had been prepared especially for him. He of course liked it, since it was brought for his pleasure, and he couldn't refuse this gift. However, he soon realized it wasn't quite what he'd expected. He already felt himself regretting his decision, as the taste left much to be desired, and he knew he'd have to think about it later. Meanwhile, in her room, Annette was pondering what else she could sell to somehow improve her situation. She felt her life could be better if she had more resources. She couldn't bring back the past, and that was obvious, so she needed to think about what to do next, because a new life was just ahead, but she didn't yet know what it would hold. She had almost nothing to sell, her meager stock was of little value, and she found it difficult to find anything that could help her in her difficult situation. For several days, she washed herself thoroughly with good soap, and the results were immediate. Her hair began to shine, and she felt a sense of well-being improve, as if she had become a little fresher and lighter. There were people who bought hair to make wigs or use it for medical procedures. Her hair, with its rare green color, could have been a highly valuable commodity, which gave her hope. There was no knock at the door, and Annette assumed it was most likely a maid who had come to run some errand. But when she opened it, her father stood before her and asked what she was doing in her room. The girl replied that she didn't do anything in particular, and then asked him why he'd come. Her gaze was calm, but inside, she was already beginning to wonder what he wanted and why he'd come. Her father informed her that, as he had said earlier, he was planning to head north. He specified that he planned to leave in 2 days, and perhaps she had something she wanted to tell him before he left. The girl said that she understood him and did not think that this honey was a long time, regardless of upbringing, how far the capital is. From here, the road in the north takes at least 10 days. Since he planned to use magical movement, the process wouldn't take long. This sped up their task, and everything went according to plan. The girl could calm down. Annette was surprised by his words. She decided to ask him what he meant, and he explained that he and his brother were magically connected. This bond allowed them to sense each other even from a distance. She understood that he needed a little time to prepare. She said she would be ready. She also mentioned that there would be another boy with them, his older brother's son, 2 years older. Annetta believed that the true heroes of this world were men. She believed this because only they were initiated into magic from an early age. However, the history of this world was much more complex. He was raised as a demon, though he looked human. He resembled a true monster, but that didn't stop him from being a hero. When his family was murdered, he was picked up by a squad of assassins. They recognized his unusual abilities and decided to take him into their care. This child became known as Cabal Argo, and his story was as mysterious as his origins. Annetta had to go and calm her older brother. She also had to mend fences with his older brother's son. He was taciturn and cruel, so Annetta had to be careful. The girl agreed with his words. However, her father noticed that there was a special atmosphere between the two of them, calm and trusting, something he didn't have with other people. Annette remarked that there was no need to worry. She would do whatever she was told. She always tried to follow instructions, because her trust in her father was boundless. She promised that if she was ordered to smile, she would definitely do so, all for the sake of fulfilling her mission and helping those in need. Her father mentioned he had something for her. He pulled out a beautiful necklace and showed it to her. It was a gift he wanted to give his daughter, and it meant something special to her. Annette was delighted. She felt the necklace was meant for her, and her heart filled with joy. She hadn't expected such a gesture from her father, and it was a pleasant surprise. But before thanking him, she asked what the decoration was. Her father replied that he was sure she knew about it. He claimed to have found it along the way, but she didn't believe his words. Annette thought it was just another story, and she couldn't understand when her father would start telling the truth. He often lied, and she was tired of these fabrications. Her father remarked that he didn't usually give such things, but this time he decided to make an exception. He had indeed found the necklace, and although she remained dubious, she could appreciate its beauty. The girl thanked him and said she really liked the necklace. She no longer thought about how he found it. What mattered was that it was a gift from her beloved father. She said the necklace was truly beautiful. She put it on right away and thought it would be wonderful if it were wrapped with a ribbon. This gesture made the gift even more meaningful. The Duke asked Annette if she knew what true power was and invited her to sit down so he could explain it in detail. She agreed, eager to hear his explanation. He began his story about the four main families that influence the empire. Each of these families possesses a unique power that maintains balance in the country and helps manage its affairs. Once in the family, Annette learned that her line's power lay in greenery. These abilities allow them to listen to plants, control them, and heal wounds, restoring health to people and nature. The family she belonged to possessed a unique ability to hear plants speak and could use this power to heal, helping both people and nature. It's a gift that benefits the entire world. The Argo family, located in the north, controls Azure. Their power lies in the manipulation of water, its purification and restoration. They can bring liquids to perfect clarity, which helps in many areas. This family is capable of purifying water to crystal clarity, turning it into a source of health. However, it's best to avoid them, especially the Eastern Igna family, which rules fire. The Igna family is known in the East for its aggressive nature and barbaric behavior. They can control fire, destroying everything in their path. It's best to avoid conflict with them. Otherwise, you could find yourself in danger. The Igna family possesses the destructive power of fire and is not particularly friendly. If Annette ever encounters them, she should avoid trying to please them and keep her distance. The Duke seemed interested not only in family strengths, but also in personal preferences. Annette became curious about who else attracted his attention besides Lord Alpha of Argo. He noticed that when she drowned, he gave her seeds, part of his ability, called the water tree seed. It was an essential element of his power, enabling her to survive. She was shocked to learn that the plants remembered him, and he confirmed it. Without this knowledge, his abilities would have been meaningless. She realized that her dad was truly special. The girl said admiringly that her dad was a true hero, and she was absolutely delighted by all his stories. Her view of the world became brighter thanks to his amazing stories. She thought her father was simply unique, though she couldn't yet grasp all the subtleties of his knowledge of herbs and poisons, which would be useful in everyday life. She learned all of this from this eccentric scientist. The girl decided it was enough to talk about her father, who was a true hero. She was proud to be with such a man, and believed he had a special place in her life. She was truly grateful, because if it weren't for the Duke, she would have simply been sold to another scientist. She wouldn't have ended up in the family she was in now, and her life would have been completely different. Or she would have been taken into the merchant's family and then everything would have been completely different. She understood that she was on the brink of a different destiny, and this new life held many more possibilities. Although her life was now more troubled, she felt genuine gratitude. She realized her life had changed, and she thanked fate for the changes brought about by the Duke. The gentleman noted that in any case he was very happy for her. He believed that her life in this family was much better than it could have been elsewhere, and he was pleased with her happiness. He also noticed the food she had prepared. The girl apologized, saying the dish hadn't turned out very well because she'd been stingy and chosen cheap meat for the steak. The gentleman said that it wasn't that really bothered him, but that she'd admitted to buying the meat for 100 dirks. He was completely shocked and asked her if that was really true. The girl confirmed this, adding that she would never make such a mistake again. She apologized, hoping it wouldn't tarnish his opinion of her. He was simply shocked. He couldn't understand who could have afforded her such a purchase, and it really surprised him. He couldn't imagine anyone doing this to her. The girl was shocked by his reaction, but he meanwhile said it wasn't that bad. She shouldn't worry, because it wasn't as serious as she thought. The meat was incredibly delicious, and Annette couldn't resist wanting more. It was so delicious that she wanted to savor every bite, the flavor of which she couldn't get enough of. At that moment, the word woman came to mind, and he decided he wouldn't quibble about the dish. He decided the little lady deserved only the best, and there was no point in arguing over trivialities. After all this, the Duke said he had to go. He still had much work to do, and he felt time was running out, so he decided to hurry. The girl realized he had to go, and a little embarrassed, told him to be careful. She knew he wouldn't be offended by her words, but she still felt a little awkward saying such things. After that, they headed north. The journey was quick, and soon he was able to show her what he had prepared, though she didn't yet realize what exactly she was about to see. Annette woke up, washed, and changed. She rubbed her eyes and looked around. They were already in the north, and everything around them was completely different. She was surprised by how quickly everything had changed. They reached the north in a matter of minutes. Annette couldn't believe it was possible. She stood there amazed at how quickly they could reach such a remote place. She surveyed the surroundings and realized there was nothing there. It looked like a simple teleportation point, nothing more than an empty hallway for moving from one place to another. At that moment, Argo entered the room. Seeing Chagall, he couldn't hide his joy. His face beamed with happiness, and he immediately sensed that meeting his friend was something important. He greeted his best friend joyfully. Argo was genuinely happy to see Chagall, and it was evident in his mood and the way he eagerly ran toward him. The gentleman was also glad to meet his brother. When he saw him, his face broke into a smile. He too had been looking forward to this meeting and was happy that they finally met again. Argo couldn't resist immediately throwing himself into Chagall's arms. Annette stood to the side. Observing the moment, she sensed that it was something deeply touching and meaningful for both of them. Annette thought there would be only two of them, but then another person appeared. He hugged Chagall with such sincerity that he didn't seem to mind. The whole moment seemed completely natural. Alf Agro stood before her. Annette noticed that he was a friend of Chagall's and wondered how he could have adopted a child. This was a surprising revelation, but she decided not to ask any further questions. Annette approached him, greeted him respectfully, and bowed. Her manner was reserved, but she felt it was the right moment for such a gesture. It was quite unexpected for her. She took a deep breath to calm herself and prepare for the meeting. The nervousness hadn't yet disappeared, but she knew she needed to be prepared for something important. The girl introduced herself by her name, Annette. The gentleman was pleased to meet her and remarked on her very good manners, which immediately left a favorable impression. His words slightly pleased her. Annette couldn't help but admit that she had much in common with her wise father. She was always proud of this and tried to emulate his best qualities, for he was a role model for her. Argo, who was standing nearby, agreed with her words. He emphasized that her father was a true genius, an intelligent and kind man. This opinion seemed entirely fair and justified to him. They arrived at the faucet room, and the girl was likely feeling tired. They asked her to rest, have breakfast, and gain some strength, as her condition clearly required rest. Annette's father also approved of her decision to rest. He noted her agitated expression with surprise and thought it wasn't so strange since she'd been on the move all the time. After a while, they were escorted to the dining room, where Annette was stunned by how everything was arranged. The atmosphere and surroundings simply astounded her, and she looked around with pleasure. Annette felt her stomach begin to rumble with hunger, but she was told to sit down for now. She obediently sat, although she felt she would soon be overwhelmed by hunger, but she tried to be patient. The master, noticing the absence of his son, Cabal inquired where he was. The maid calmly replied that he would appear soon, and they could continue waiting without worry. Annette guessed they were talking about the most important person, and he was supposed to appear soon. She was a little nervous waiting for this moment, hoping that everything would go well. The gentleman said his son hadn't quite mastered his manners yet, but that was no big deal. He believed it was perfectly acceptable to overlook the details in such moments. Annetta smiled and replied that everything was fine. She showed that she wasn't worried about it and tried to act calmly, as she always did in new situations. The boy, noticing her nervousness, added with a smile that she probably shouldn't call him Duke. He thought he should be careful with that. But that didn't frighten Annette. Annette agreed with his remark. Although she felt a little awkward, as it was their first meeting, she tried to remain calm and not show her uncertainty. Finally, the main character was brought in, but Annette felt a slight unease when she saw him. Something about his appearance or demeanor immediately put her on guard, and she even felt a little afraid. They brought a whole fried chicken. It's probably a hot spot. Annetta noticed this guy because she couldn't understand why he was eating chicken with his bare hands and without even cutting it, which seemed strange and a little sloppy. She soon noticed him throw the chicken aside and realized he must have burned his tongue, as his reaction was so sudden and painful. This immediately caught her eye. The boy started screaming and hitting the chicken, clearly unable to bear the pain. Annette was completely at a loss, unsure what to do. She watched him, unsure how to react to this behavior. He was obviously very angry and upset. Annette guessed his irritation was caused by the food being hot. The whole thing seemed odd, since hot food should be safe by nature. Her father tried to intervene and help, but Annette quickly said everything was fine. At that moment, a piece of chicken accidentally flew into her face, which of course surprised her, but didn't upset her. Mr. Cabal, seeing her reaction, realized he needed to calm down. Annette told him not to worry and to let the boy recover a little. She knew that after such emotions, he simply needed time. Suddenly, Annette approached the boy and, without thinking, hugged him. It was her way of comforting him, showing support. At first, he was confused and even angry, but gradually, his anger began to subside. When the boy calmed down, Annette smiled, said he was doing well, and praised him for not giving up. These were simple but sincere words that helped him feel better. The boy's response was a little embarrassed, not expecting that from Annette. His face flushed, and she, seeing his reaction, smiled even wider. That was the moment when he began to perceive her actions differently. Annette, noticing his confusion, took the bread and handed it to him, saying it was his reward. It was her simple yet unusual expression of gratitude for his patience. At first, the boy was completely shocked when she offered him bread, but he soon came to appreciate the unexpected gesture. The bread turned out to be delicious, and he happily accepted it despite his initial reaction. Annette was shocked when he grabbed the bread and began eating. She hadn't expected him to react so quickly, but apparently he was genuinely hungry and ready to enjoy the food no matter what. The bread Cabal Argo always ate before was hard and tasteless, which he didn't like, but the bread Annette offered him was completely different, soft and pleasant, which he really enjoyed. The book revealed useful information based on memories, allowing for a better understanding of what was happening. This knowledge was like a beacon of light, helping to navigate situations. It would have been much more convenient if they had warned her about this in advance, but instead, the girl simply sighed, realizing that she would now have to act according to the circumstances. The father was truly shocked to see his son Cabal sitting so calmly and quietly at the table eating. His silence was surprising, as he was usually more active and noisy. The girl thought he should be easy to obey. She was sure he, like a little cloud, would obey her without question, because her words had power. So she said they could begin their meal now. With her gentle gesture, everyone seated could continue, and she felt a little more confident in her control of the situation. The gentleman, hearing her words, was delighted. He gratefully agreed and expressed appreciation for her guidance. He was clearly pleased with her attention to detail. However, despite her agreement, she had to literally spoon-feed him, as he was completely unwilling to eat on his own. It seemed he couldn't continue eating without her help until she offered him meat. Phew, she was tired. Her arms were starting to ache from the constant effort. She'd lost count of how many times she'd had to feed him, but she knew her care was important. She had hoped to have time to rest after dinner, but reality proved otherwise. Her expectations were dashed, and the work continued, demanding her attention and effort. The girl noticed him hiding behind a bush watching her. He moved closer and closer to her, and his behavior became increasingly noticeable, especially when he followed her to the library. This behavior from the Argo family's heir was unusual. He had always been modest and reserved, and now following her, he displayed traits rare in his family. She couldn't figure out where the guards had disappeared to. The thought flashed through her mind that perhaps the maid was looking for him. Since boys were so fickle and secretive, it was all very strange and confusing to her. She called him over, and he suddenly appeared, emerging from behind the bushes. He appeared as if from nowhere quietly, as if he hadn't even been there. The whole scene was so unexpected. The girl extended her hand to him, asking him to take it. She didn't expect him to hesitate, and that was important, because her request was sincere and meaningful at that moment. Although he clearly showed no emotion, it was obvious even without deep thought. He made no attempt to hide his indifference. His face remained calm, as did his demeanor. Cabal Argo was trained not to show emotion, which was obvious. He was a master at maintaining calm in any situation, and his face always remained impassive and neutral. She couldn't say for sure that her mistress was right. Her mind was in disarray, as the voice that had appeared was alarming and continually repeated warnings, making her doubt her decisions. She took his hand, feeling her fingers brush against his rough skin. It was an unexpected abruptness, and despite the fact that he seemed like a child to her, she began to perceive him as a grown man. Even though her life was limited, she still continued to strive for something greater. This feeling never left her, and although she couldn't change anything, her inner desire for knowledge remained alive. If she could survive and hold out, she could secure the support of the powerful Aubrey family. This support might have guaranteed her a peaceful life for the rest of her days, but there were too many unknowns. The same voice that had predicted Aubrey's family would be on the brink of disaster echoed in her head again. It spoke of her wife's death as the beginning of a chain of tragedies that would soon unfold. The voice confirmed once again that the Duchess would indeed die. This wasn't just a rumor, but reality, and everything was predetermined. This event would pave the way for the inevitable chaos. Even her older brother, now living on the streets, would suffer. This fact left no doubt. His fate was sealed too. Everything that was happening was part of a greater tragedy that no one could avoid. The heroine Shekinah Aubrey will take center stage in this world. She will be the central figure, and it is her life that will shape the future, her fate that will determine everything that happens next. Shekinah Aubrey. She was truly amazing. The girl they adopted was so quickly accepted into the family. It was an incredibly touching moment. She not only adapted to her new life, but also quickly took control of the duchy. Her actions were intelligent and decisive. The Duke, on the other hand, remained a father figure filled with boundless love for her. Suddenly, memories of old notes came flooding back to her. She recalled the name of the child who was supposed to be adopted instead of her. This thought of the past haunted her, but she decided it didn't matter. As she reflected, she realized there was no point in delving further into these thoughts. She wasn't blood related to this family anyway, but despite this, her relationship with them had become important and close to her. The boy looked at her with bewilderment, not understanding what was happening. She decided there was no need to worry about it, since everything happening around her didn't really matter. She was ready to move on. Annette decided to tell Cabal that what she was looking for wasn't here. She suggested he leave this place as they hadn't found anything useful. There was no longer any doubt in her eyes. She was ready to move forward. Cable pointed to the other side, and Annette noticed his gesture. It was quite unexpected, but she followed his instructions, understanding that they had to move on to seek new opportunities. At that moment, something caught her attention. She noticed something heavy begin to fall on Cabal, which immediately alarmed her. She knew she couldn't let him get hurt. Without thinking, she shouted at him to run quickly to her. A moment later, she managed to catch him and prevent him from falling. She felt a sense of relief when she realized he was safe and unharmed by the fall. Annette breathed a sigh of relief, glad that Cabal was okay. She was grateful to fate for having been able to prevent such a disaster in time. Now she could calm down a little. However, it seemed Annette herself had slightly overestimated her strength. She twisted her ankle slightly, feeling a sharp pain. It was minor, but still unpleasant. She tried not to show what was bothering her. At that moment, the Duke entered the room with one of his servants. They looked at her and Cabal in surprise. The Duke immediately noticed the change in their relationship, and now he realized she was no longer just a stranger. Argo was in complete shock when he saw what was happening. Confused and stunned, he began calling out to his son, trying to understand what had happened and how quickly he could resolve the situation. His voice was anxious and trembling with emotion. The girl standing nearby felt relieved to learn that the boy was unharmed. She was glad there were no serious injuries. Her face immediately filled with relief, as she had been afraid for him. At that moment, her father approached her. The girl was surprised when he addressed her only now, although she expected him to be there from the very beginning. He looked worried, and there was concern in his eyes. He tried to say something, but the girl noticed his words weren't directed at her. She was glad, however, that Cabal was okay. She saw that he didn't seem to be hurt at all, which gave her confidence. The girl felt her heart clench and immediately apologized for bringing him here without permission. She began to realize she could have acted differently, but nothing could be changed now. As she stood up, she reflected on how she should have kept a closer eye on him to avoid any unpleasant situations. She felt her actions could have been more careful and prudent. She knew that if she'd been more careful, things might have turned out differently, but she immediately heard her words make no sense and was told that was enough. That phrase was enough to stop her self-reflection. The girl sensed that he was deeply angry. She couldn't figure out what else she'd done wrong. This added to her uncertainty, and she tried to find an explanation for his anger. At that moment, she saw her father approach her and take her leg in his hands. He did so with obvious concern, as if trying to figure out what had happened and why she was in such a state. The girl tried to reassure him, saying she was actually fine. She tried to convince him that her condition wasn't something to worry about. However, her father couldn't believe it was really that simple. The girl felt that all of this had happened because of her stupid mistakes. She noted that it could have been corrected if she had acted differently. Her words conveyed genuine pain at how things had turned out. She decided it would be enough to simply rest for a day. She apologized for what had happened, hoping it would help her rectify the situation and restore peace to their relationship. The gentleman, clearly perplexed, asked her again if he really had that expression on his face, as if he expected her to apologize. His question made her feel even more awkward and wanted to do everything right. The girl was completely shocked by his words. He said it was time for them to go to their room, and it sounded like a command. Her heart started pounding and not knowing what to say. She obeyed him. He picked her up and noticed that she was very stubborn. He was surprised by her resilience, as she continued to resist and did not ask for help despite her injury. He couldn't understand how she could walk with such a leg. The pain was visible in her eyes, but she seemed to ignore it and kept moving, which baffled him. The girl said she didn't want to talk about her pain or cause him any more trouble. She assured him everything was fine. She didn't even expect Duke Aubrey to hug her, knowing his aversion to dirt. He couldn't believe she wasn't in pain, as the wound looked quite serious, but she confidently replied that she truly didn't feel any pain. Having gotten used to it, she'd learned to tolerate it and ignore it. He couldn't agree with her opinion. He said she was more likely trying to convince herself of the absence of pain. Habit doesn't eliminate pain. It simply helps one come to terms with its presence. He confidently said that people learn to endure pain. The girl, however, was puzzled by his words, not understanding how he could know what it was like to endure pain, since he had never experienced it. She seemed to have no problems with etiquette. She behaved very calmly, and her manners did not provoke any comments. She handled herself well in society. He needed to teach her to ask for help, even if she wasn't used to it. She needed to understand that sometimes she needed to let other people help, despite her independence. The girl was a little surprised when he asked what he should do about her behavior, because she was the Duke's only daughter, and absolutely did not know how to ask for help in difficult situations. If she asked for something, she would definitely do it. The girl was sure that her requests would always be fulfilled if she decided to voice them. She could be a refined and elegant noble lady admired by everyone, or a mischievous girl disturbing the peace and causing a fuss. This was in her nature. Her father agreed, noting that she could indeed be a troublemaker at times. Sometimes she'd throw genuine tantrums, which was a nuisance to everyone. The girl was completely shocked by his remark. She said that people talk about her as a wonderful genius, but with age a person changes, and sometimes being capricious is just part of growing up. The girl claimed that if her personality suddenly changed, she would become even weirder and crazier. She thought that changing herself would only make her appear more odd in the eyes of others. She couldn't understand why his preferences had changed so suddenly, or what was going on at all. It all confused her, and she couldn't find a logical explanation for it. Her father remarked that no one would dare judge her, and advised her to no longer be shy, and to ask for help when needed. But the girl assured him that she didn't need anything at the moment. Her father was surprised by her refusal, and told her to think carefully. Then she remembered the little animal that had once needed her care and cared for her in return. The little brother's heart was full of love, but he didn't understand what exactly his little sister needed to be happy. He thought that if the princess didn't have her own doll, everything else was meaningless. But he couldn't figure out what the girl really liked. He himself didn't know what she liked, and this confused him. He wanted her joy to be genuine, not forced. Determined to find out, he went to the girl. He decided it was the only way to find out what she really needed. He was ready to do anything to make her happy. She came out to him, looking at him curiously. She asked if he'd called her. He noticed she seemed a little lost in thought, but she assumed he'd simply wandered off somewhere and didn't pay much attention. When she saw 3 different toys in front of her, her eyes lit up. He was delighted by her reaction. Because he hoped she would be happy with at least one of them, he felt contented watching her smile. He wanted the girl to be able to do whatever she wanted. Now he was ready to allow her anything, so she could feel free. After all, he was ready to make any sacrifice and effort for her. He watched her, hoping she would accept his gift and be happy. He was sure that was exactly what she was looking for, but she didn't seem to even notice he was trying so hard. He was shocked to realize she didn't seem to care. She showed little interest in the toys, even though he'd stood in line for a long time to get his hands on these rare items. Annette noticed him standing nearby and decided to ask how long he'd been there. She felt curious, and her question was involuntarily prompted by that interest. The plan he had been hatching was about to fall apart. He quickly realized the situation had escalated, and to avoid further suspicion, he simply stepped back slightly, hoping it wouldn't raise any questions. The girl assumed he'd come to ask about some toy, and despite her naivety, she intuitively sensed that this was exactly what he wanted to talk about. He, for his part, realized he'd been found out. Then, slightly puzzled, he said it was all related to the falling process, but added that she might be interested in hearing about it. Annette was intrigued and began to listen to his words. As she picked up the toy, he wondered if he'd have to buy her something else. A thought flashed through his mind of a cute gift, perhaps a small kitten that she'd love. Annette noticed that her brother was older than her, so she didn't think he'd be interested in such toys. She was somewhat shocked by the thought of having to choose something for him. However, the boy calmly replied that the toy wasn't for him at all, and that Annette probably didn't understand what was really going on. He smiled reservedly, watching her reaction. The girl suddenly realized she had already been rescued, and it hadn't occurred to her that there was any other reason why she should be kept here. This was unexpected for her. Her father, noticing her confusion, said she didn't fully grasp the situation. He believed she mistakenly believed that treatment was all that was needed to solve the problem. He warned her that if this happened again, the situation would be truly unpleasant. She needed to exercise caution, and she should view this as an honor and a unique opportunity. In fact, all this treatment was aimed at getting rid of all the troubles, but this inner voice did not give her peace, continuing to sound in her head, like a reminder of her ignorance. The head of the house's healing abilities were so powerful that they could restore life even to those on the brink of death, healing any injuries, both external and internal, without exception. She was amazed by such abilities and acknowledged her mistake, realizing that she shouldn't continue to insist on her own way. She stopped shouting out her doubts and accepted his words. This power could not cure all diseases, but it is quite capable of healing dead skin and also prolonging life if it really could be a cure for all problems. Everything would be so much simpler if she just took this medicine, which acts as a panacea for many ills. She wouldn't even need to sit in his arms. Everything would get better on its own. Now she realized he was genuinely worried about her. He'd said she should be more careful next time, but there was a hint of concern and a hint of wariness in his words. But at that moment, she realized he wasn't being entirely honest with her. Despite this, her leg no longer hurt, and it seemed her worries were unfounded, but her feelings remained mixed. The father admitted that he couldn't stand caring for other people's illnesses and treating them. He said this frankly, without hiding his aversion to this role, despite his love for his daughter. Even if someone were dying before his eyes, he probably wouldn't intervene. His mercy was limited, and only in rare cases would he help. There was no sentimentality or unnecessary emotion in this. But there remained that 1% of people he could help if circumstances were different, and she, despite everything, could be among those few to whom he would reach out. The girl had previously thought his actions were driven solely by self-interest. However, now, in her eyes, there was only a 0.5% chance that this was true. It was much more complicated. A 5-year contract or any other agreement, regardless of its form, still didn't promise simplicity. In this situation, there was no clear understanding of how everything would unfold. Most importantly, she no longer had to be shy about asking for what she wanted. She began to realize that her desires were important and didn't need to be hidden, even if they seemed insignificant. He was the perfect man with money, honor, and good looks. However, the girl saw this perfection crumbling under the weight of her own thoughts. She gave up everything, saying she needed nothing. He suggested she come up with something else, but she dismissed it as empty words. Her mind refused to entertain suggestions that lacked real value, despite his good intentions. The girl sighed, and her father couldn't understand why. He thought her leg was hurting again, but she knew the pain was gone, and her sigh was more likely due to the confusion surrounding the situation. She told him that, thanks to his help, the pain had gone away, and she was now feeling much better. But despite this, the 5-year contract still left her uncertain about what would happen next. One might conclude from such words that she needed to behave better. However, there was another thought hidden behind them. The researcher who had invented the remedy that could help the Duchess was no ordinary man. First and foremost, she needed to find this researcher to understand how his discoveries could impact her life and the lives of those she cared about. After all, this man could be the key to many solutions. It was a good thing Annette decided to stay another day. She changed into a dress suitable for going out. This allowed her to take a step toward unexpected events that could open up new possibilities. She realized she had a unique opportunity to meet the mad scientist. If she told the Duke about it, he would surely want to go with her. It was a chance she couldn't miss. However, Annette decided it would be better to get up early and leave quietly. Leaving a note by the bed, she hoped her actions wouldn't raise any unnecessary questions and would avoid unnecessary conversations. The carriage arrived just in time, and Annette felt relieved. The driver was overly curious and asked where she was going. She replied that she needed to see her mother and asked him to take her to the right region. Along the way, Annette explained that her route would lead her into the forest. The driver agreed without objection, and soon he dropped her off among the dense trees where she could continue her journey. As the carriage pulled away, Annette felt grateful. Despite the noisy and somewhat bumpy ride, she was glad she'd reached her destination without having to walk. The driver also helped her out of the carriage, as Annette herself could barely do it on her own. She appreciated his assistance, even despite the slight awkwardness of the situation. The driver wished her luck in her meeting, then with a brief goodbye, drove off. Annette was left alone, but she felt a sense of certainty that she had done the right thing in embarking on this journey. She was a little embarrassed, because in this place among the wooden houses, she felt a bit of an outsider. She didn't want to be perceived as a child or a strange guest, which added a certain awkwardness. There were plenty of weapons around, and rumors swirled that a mad scientist lived on the outskirts of the village. Annette knew she'd have to navigate these dangerous terrain to reach her destination. The scientist was said to work as a gravedigger, and because people avoided him, his house always remained empty. It was a place rarely visited, which only added to the mystery of it all. There was a hut next to the cemetery, and Annette was sure this was the place she was looking for. Her steps became more determined as she approached this abandoned corner of the village. She asked locals passing by if this was really Mr. Frick's house, and in response, she heard strange sounds coming from the hut. Annette felt her heart beat faster in surprise. It was especially scary that night, and she knocked on the door again, determined to make sure Mr. Freak was indeed inside. She couldn't be sure without this final clarification. She reported that he already had guests, and then slowing her steps a little, tried to listen, hoping to hear some sounds that could confirm her suspicions. It couldn't be helped. She thought leaving the letter where it was. Just in case, since she couldn't know exactly when they'd be able to meet again, she decided to leave her message. She hoped Mr. Frick would finally contact her, as it was becoming increasingly difficult to hide her illness, and she couldn't keep it to herself. The wait was excruciating, but there was no other way. But it was time for her to return, as the Duke had begun asking questions about her disappearance at the estate. He had clearly noticed her absence and was wondering where she had been. Annette replied that she was just taking a walk. However, her appearance betrayed her anxiety. She was clearly agitated. The walk hadn't brought her any peace. On the contrary, it had made her feel even more tense. She explained that she hadn't been fooling around, hadn't broken any rules, or done anything dangerous. It had been just a stroll, nothing more. She tried to reassure the Duke, but there was a hidden concern in her voice. In a sense, of course, it really was just a walk. But only in a sense, Annette couldn't help but think that it was this walk that had led her to these thoughts. She didn't know if he could contain his anger. It was obvious the Duke was hiding something, but she didn't dare ask him directly. Her words might arouse even more suspicion. She noticed that this was the first walk she'd ever taken alone. This feeling of freedom was unexpected, and she hoped that next time her father would come with her, so she wouldn't be alone. The Duke sighed heavily. He was already growing tired of talking to her, and firmly told her to simply forget about what had happened. That was his final decision. He noted that it was time to go to their room, as his uncle had already begun waiting for them. This was necessary, as time did not allow for any further delay. Annette agreed and followed him. When they entered the room, she ate and felt grateful for the food offered. It was just what she needed at that moment. As she was about to leave, the gentleman asked her to stay for a minute. He wanted to apologize. This statement stunned the girl, and she asked him again, not believing her ears. Duke Aubrey did say that it was his duty to apologize, but the man added that he didn't think the guards and cabal would be heading towards her because of the incident. He heard that Annette had injured her leg and wanted to know how she was feeling during their conversation. He also mentioned that he might have caused her too much trouble. The girl tried to assure him that she was fine, but her father intervened, saying that they really had enough problems now that they couldn't be solved so easily. Annette was increasingly confused about what was happening to the Duke, unable to comprehend what exactly was troubling him. At this point, he simply laughed, but why was unclear. She couldn't understand why he was laughing, as his behavior was strange. Argo, however, noticed that this was the first time the Duke had been so abrupt with him since their first meeting. Yes, he was too careless. Cabal possesses such exceptional skills that even his knights have difficulty coping with them. I should have been more careful. It was probably unpleasant that everything turned out so unexpectedly, and it seems that the situation could have developed completely differently from the start. In fact, he's genuinely sorry it all turned out this way. It seems his son didn't mean her any harm, and even though his intentions were good, the girl still replied that thanks to her dad, she was okay. The gentleman was grateful for her understanding. He also noted that Cabal had never shown any interest before, but suddenly he came and started asking about her, which surprised him. It was then that he began to ask if the girl would go with him, and she answered positively, offering her hand, showing that she was ready to go with him. However, before the girl could take his hand, her father stopped her and asked if she was okay, alarmed by her condition. Argo in turn reassured him, saying there was no bleeding and no cause for concern, but her father countered that her height and face weren't quite what he'd expected. The father continued to worry that the girl's condition might worsen if she went with him. Argo noticed that there was a truly strong attachment between them. The girl couldn't understand what was wrong with her, why all this was so important, and why he was so worried about her condition. The gentleman insisted on bringing Cabal. He understood that nothing could be changed otherwise, and it was important that everything happen at the right moment. The girl greeted him, but the boy looked confused and scared, as if he didn't know what to do in such an unusual, intense moment. There was no need to apologize. She told him it was just an accident, and she didn't feel at all that he was to blame for anything. Despite her words, the boy continued to look guilty, as if there was some hidden trace of anxiety and regret in his eyes. She noticed that he had brought her a flower, and was surprised, not expecting such a gesture. It was unexpected and sweet of him. It was said that this flower only bloomed for those whose blood belonged to the Duke's family of Argo, and this added significance to his deed. Annette was deeply touched by his attention, and gratefully called him by name, feeling that this was an important and symbolic moment. The boy asked her name again, and she replied that it was his name, surprised at how sincerely he was interested in such simple things. The girl thought that, in this way, he probably just wanted to know her name, and she found it very sweet and touching. She told him that her name was Annette, and after these words, the boy immediately rushed to her with a hug, unable to contain his emotions. The Duke became angry again, and shouted loudly that he could no longer believe what kind of children had grown up marveling at their carefree behavior in such serious situations. Argo was delighted that his son had finally spoken his first words, and it seemed like a real achievement for the whole family. The Duke began shouting, demanding the boy immediately remove his hands from his daughter. He quickly added that it was time for them to leave. Everything was clear, and the situation could not tolerate delay. Argo was delighted, his face lit up with a wide smile. He expressed gratitude for the visit, glad he had been able to see them and spend some time together. He then turned to Annette, asking if she would visit them again. The girl replied that if she had the opportunity, she would be happy to visit them again. Cable also approached Annetta, saying they would definitely meet again. The girl promised she would come, but advised him to study hard and to chat next time. It seemed Cabal only remembered her name as he repeated it over and over again. Annette merely smiled and reminded him of the importance of studying diligence was key. She assured him that if he worked hard, they would definitely meet, and this would be a good motivation for further success. Afterwards, waving goodbye, she wished good luck to everyone who remained. The atmosphere was warm, and Annetta felt a sense of lightness in her soul. The gentleman also said goodbye to her, but when his son saw her teleport, he exclaimed in surprise. It was unexpected and attracted attention. Annette felt as if she was leaving someone in a difficult situation, as if she were abandoning a small child, which weighed on her a little. A few days later, something even more disturbing than falling off the closet occurred. Such an event is very rare, and it seemed that today was that day. Everyone was shocked, and her father even began to suspect that Annette had gone mad. His anxiety grew, and he couldn't understand what was happening. As expected, her hair became too noticeable, attracting attention and causing confusion among those around her. This couldn't go unnoticed. Annetta simply started smiling and laughing, unfazed by what was happening. Her reaction was unexpected, and she decided to take it all in stride. Finding herself in the spotlight, she realized her rare green hair was far more valuable than she ever imagined. The chimera returned to her. Of course, she immediately reported the incident to the guards so that they would be aware of what had happened and could take the necessary measures. Most likely, the guards had already begun gathering to sort out the situation. News of this unusual situation spread quickly. The father approached Annette and, looking at her with concern, asked if someone had really offended her. Annetta quickly began to justify herself, saying it wasn't at all what everyone thought. She'd simply always had long hair, and sometimes it was inconvenient in everyday life. The gentleman looked at her carefully, perplexed, as to why she'd decided to take such a step herself instead of asking someone for help. Was it really that hard for her to say? The girl shrugged and said it was just a change in mood. She just felt like it, that's all. Even she was surprised, come to think of it. Even her brother Enos was clearly dissatisfied and angry with her, but Chagall, on the contrary, was strangely silent, which in itself was quite unusual. The father, observing the situation, did not forget to remind his son that it was high time for him to go to class, because time does not wait. However, the guy calmly replied that today's lesson had simply been rescheduled for tomorrow, so there was nothing to worry about. But his father immediately cut him off, telling him not to talk nonsense. Then turning to his sister, Enos said they would see each other again. Annette frowned, not understanding why her brother had suddenly become so stubborn and irritable. At that moment, her father pointed to a chair and invited her to sit. But when she sat down, she suddenly felt as if she had sat right on a prickly cactus. She felt so awkward. Her father looked at her carefully and calmly said that it seemed that Annette thought that he really didn't understand why she was starting all this. The girl rolled her eyes and noted with a hint of irony that her father was of course a genius. How could he be otherwise? After all, he knew everything as always. If Annette didn't praise him, she'd be in trouble. The Duke made it clear he understood her desire to assert her boundaries, but his patience was limited. He knew the girl had her own opinion, and he tried to accept it. However, at times her stubbornness went beyond his control, and he had to put up with it. But if she continues to neglect herself like this, he will be forced to intervene. If necessary, he will take her upbringing into his own hands and not allow her to behave like this. Annette didn't think the situation was that serious. He was simply an unusual creature, but she didn't know how to convince her father that she was perfectly capable of caring for him. Her father couldn't understand why she needed to sell her hair to buy this little animal, especially since she had no money. It all seemed absurd to him. But Annette couldn't let anyone dictate her actions. She still had a lot to accomplish, and she wasn't about to give up her freedom. There was no turning back. The Duke warned her that if something like this happened again, he would be forced to take action. This wasn't just idle talk, he was serious. But then he heard his daughter sob. Through her tears, she tried to explain that she simply wanted to buy something with her own money. Nothing wrong with that. Then, Annette decided to resort to cunning. She smiled sweetly and said that Dad shouldn't be angry. He didn't want to fight, did he? She admitted she had done wrong. Her words stung. Admitting a mistake, especially in that tone, touched the Duke more than he expected. But he didn't allow himself to be moved. He warned her not to even think about solving all her problems with charm. It wouldn't always work. Although it seemed like he genuinely thought she was sweet, he added, however, that if anything happened to her, Mom would be incredibly upset, and he wouldn't let that happen. Annette understood his concern perfectly. Then he asked what kind of animal she had decided to buy, and why it was so important to her. After all, it didn't even have a scientific name. Apparently, her father had already done a little research, but Annette didn't lose her composure and simply replied that the animal was rare. She was warned in advance. If anyone reported her to the control inspectorate, she would be immediately arrested. This wasn't just a warning, but a real threat that could change her entire life. She was threatened with having her pet taken away from her, and she hoped the fear of loss would make him change his mind. But it seemed he didn't believe it wasn't afraid, and didn't fall for her trick. Annette said she felt too sorry for the little animal languishing in the store's cage. It reminded her of her childhood, something important. She lowered her eyes, and added that he didn't like animals. But he merely snorted, declaring that it was nonsense. She shouldn't talk like that, demeaning herself. Next time, she should be more careful and behave properly. Annette sighed with relief. It seemed everything had worked out, and there would be no punishment. She even allowed herself a brief smile, trying not to show her nervousness. But her father, looking at her calmly, said that after dinner she should come see him. They would discuss whether it would be possible to keep the little animal or whether they would have to part with it. When they were alone, he told her he had something important to tell her. Animals aren't just a joy, they're also a huge responsibility, and sometimes even serious problems. Annette nodded and replied that she understood that perfectly well. She knew he had started this conversation for a reason, but she didn't yet understand where exactly he was leading. Her father continued, "Starting next week, she will be attending classes. This is not up for discussion. It is a necessity, and he expects her to take it seriously." He was also curious about something important. How did she learn about the magic stone? This question was crucial to him, and he expected an honest answer. He explained that he had been conducting experiments. The magical stones possessed varying powers, but they all melted only at a very specific temperature, which was extremely curious. He's confused. How could she even know about this? No one should know such details, least of all her. But Annette doesn't seem surprised, as if she's had this information for a long time. The mad scientist, as he was dubbed for good reason, was famous for more than just his experiments with chimeras. Before that, he created magical stones, studying their properties and interactions with energy. A total of 987 stones. That was the figure. Annette somehow knew at what temperature they melted, but she couldn't say it outright. She would simply be considered insane. So she decided to lie. Calmly and confidently, she claimed she'd simply guessed it was the safest course of action, as it would arouse unnecessary suspicion. Mr. Chagall looked at her closely, noticing that she was making such guesses far too easily. He wasn't used to believing in coincidences, and wasn't about to ignore this. However, he couldn't read her thoughts, or know exactly what she was hiding. He could only guess, since Annette clearly had no intention of sharing her secrets. They would soon begin selling the magical stones, and he was about to show her the contract. Now all that remained was to wait for the moment when they could discuss the terms of the deal. The girl was happy, because finally she would get her share of this. She would have liked to get 20%, not 10, but she does want to earn money. When she read, she noticed that it was written incorrectly and decided to tell her father about it. Well, my father didn't quite understand what she was talking about. He checked everything and didn't notice anything strange. Annette noticed that it says here that she receives 10% of the proceeds. Father didn't quite understand where she was leading with this. She pointed out that there was a mistake in this part, but her father repeated that he did not understand. If you look closely, everything will become clear. She showed him where the mistake was, and came very close to him. Annette noticed that another zero needs to be added there. She noticed how her father smiled, because she was asking to add another zero to this one zero. By the way, that store was closed at the request of a certain person. Annette added that, besides, it would be a huge success, and I think it would be a waste of time. But the father didn't understand where she was leading. The girl noted that he would regret it, but since she did not want to accept what he gave her, he had no choice but to give her everything she earned. The girl was shocked whether he regretted it or not. This man practically monopolized a large part of the imperial trade. She suggested renegotiating their contract. If anything happens to her, she will transfer her exclusive distribution rights to the Duke's house. The gentleman asked again if he had heard correctly what she was saying about something possibly happening to her. The girl swept that you never know what might happen. But when she tried to finish writing this point, father said that this would not happen. But the girl thought that it was still just a waste. If she doesn't develop a cure for the Duchess, they will both die. Whether it is successful or not, she will definitely die. The girl pointed out that he could also include such a clause to ensure himself, but the Duke believed that this would not help. Annette noted that this is excellent. She is offering to conclude exactly this kind of contract. She insists on it, but she is grateful that he agreed. The father agreed and said he would do his part well. Then the girl asked again. The gentleman confirmed this and noted, trying to say that looking at her, he felt as if his daughter had truly returned to life. The Duke noted when he thought so. If she had grown up in a safe place, perhaps she would have been like our main character. Now this means that the girl is doing a good job of being a daughter. The Duke said that this was indeed the case, and would in any case try the snacks he had bought for her. Come to think of it, she had a lot of work to do, so she'd take a trip to space later. The father tried to say something else, but she simply said goodbye to him. He was surprised he didn't understand what it was. The girl didn't understand what she had just done, because she said that she had a lot of things to do, and didn't understand who would believe that. This is very stupid. She should not forget that she was accepted only for the contract. At some point, she really began to believe that they were a real family. She's just a girl playing the role of his daughter. That's the best way to think of it. Then the little animal approached her. Annette was delighted. She was quite tame when it came to hitting. There is no need to be sad without a reason. Everything is as it should be. She is not a real daughter, but just someone who does her job well. Everything is going according to plan. Now when the synthetic mana-stones are discovered, she will receive an invitation. The most influential scientist of the Empire will be recognized as the Scientist of the Year, and the association invites other scientists, the Imperial Association of Scientists, and shares knowledge with them. They call them conferences, but I actually wanted it to be a ball, a floor ball, like in the fall, when some crazy guy with synthetic mana-stones was chosen to name the academic year. In 2 weeks, the mad scientists will probably complete their development, and despite the fact that the autumn banquet will take place in 2 months, she will present her development in 2 weeks. They will still see how time runs out before their eyes. She decided to think about it, since it didn't have a name yet. Even if she left, she hoped that the chimera would live well. She decided to name him Chess, and then he wagged his tail. She gave him such a name so that she could pass any path with ease. And then she noticed something strange. They said that the chimera had some kind of mysterious power, but she wasn't sure it was true. Then she heard someone calling her and turned around. It was her brother, who told her to come with him to eat some goodies. But the girl said that she had already eaten, and she thought they didn't see it. My brother noticed that someone had accidentally said that he didn't want the animal cookies from the capital's most famous bakery, which were sold in a limited edition of only 20 pieces, and asked him to throw them away. He continued talking, but the girl did not understand what all this verbosity was about. She wondered if she would say that, and he would probably think she was sick, so she said that she agreed she liked warm milk with lots of honey. The brother said that if this is the case, then he will prepare it right now. She can come to her room in about 10 minutes, and the girl said that she understood him. She is going crazy if it seems cute to her. She should have said that she bought them simply because she wanted to eat. It seems she fell in love with this family. Hearing such things makes her happy. Moreover, she cannot simply stand aside. She must find someone who can figure out the cure for the Duchess. She will find them inventing no matter how long it takes. Again, she acts on her own. The Duke may be angry about this. The girl understood that if she asked Annette Aubrey for help, she knew for sure that he would help her. But this was not certain. If he asks her how she knows this, she will have nothing to answer. If someone fell victim to the witch's curse, the coming days would only bring more. She wondered if she should tell the man developing the cure that she wanted him to take it. She's at home, so all she has to do is tell the Duke that they helped her before. Then she realized that it was probably time for her to go, because he was probably waiting for her back. She was also wondering how much longer she had to wait. But then the doors opened, and she didn't understand what had happened. The door was opened by her father, who looked at her strangely. Annette didn't quite understand what was happening, and then the Duke started saying something. He said he needed to tell her something. He remembered the butler saying he rated his sentence 5 out of 10 for someone who was adopted to fill the role of another person. I hear such unpleasant things. The words that she is simply a replacement for his daughter are like salt in the wound. Miss is trying to solve everything on her own, just like the Duke in his youth. If Pedro weren't so annoying and talkative, he wouldn't have worried so much. The girl is now very worried for no apparent reason. The Duke said that when he looks at her, he feels as if his daughter has come back to life. But this does not mean that he equates her with this child. Sometimes, When he sees other children her age, he has the same thoughts. Annette is her, and that child is this child. The girl smiled. She thought that her father liked her. Then the father became embarrassed and said that this was not so, he didn't like anything. She didn't understand what kind of speech this was, as if she was standing in the middle of a teenage storm. Annetta cleared her throat and said that he was sad when he didn't like anything, while the man pointed out that when you start liking something, it eventually becomes his weak point. It takes his breath away, and eventually it leaves him. So it's better for him not to like anything than for him to suffer from it. The girl understood him and told him to continue to harbor hostility towards her. The Duke asked again what she was talking about, but the girl said that there was no reason, I just suddenly thought of it. Well, it's better if they don't dislike each other too much. It will be easier for them later. Well, they're pretty unpleasant to each other, so there's no need to worry too much about it. They'll split up anyway in 5 years, and there's no way to avoid it, because that's the contract. They do it without words now. Her father lowered her eyes and simply looked at her. He's a cold-blooded man. If she stabs him with a knife, he probably won't even bleed. If there really are blue bloods among the aristocrats, then he will definitely be one of them. The girl said that she had to do everything so that she could sit down for her father, who adopted her, and she asks for forgiveness for causing unnecessary concern. She said she would go in first, and then the Duke looked strange. He noticed his son standing behind him and was surprised when he saw him. The boy turned to his father and pointed out that his father had just discriminated against his adopted child. No matter how much he dislikes her, he brought her here himself, so he doesn't understand how his father could do such a thing. The Duke started to say that that wasn't really the issue, but the girl said that they'd better put that aside. He also asked what he meant when he said that he would soon divorce this child. He realized his son had heard everything and was upset. He'd forgotten to mention the 5-year contract. His father told him he didn't need to worry about it. But the guy shouted that he was worried he went to eat snacks with this kid. Father started saying that he was talking about those snacks that someone was going to throw out. The girl heard all this and understood that it was quite natural to feel uncomfortable going out early in the morning to buy them herself. It was quite funny that they were both upset. But they can speak out of an acute sense of guilt. She shouted at them that everything is fine. She will eat any food regardless of whether it is picked up or thrown away. It's all because there were many cases in the shelter when she remained hungry for several days.